Good morning and welcome here to Dunse today. I trust you have had a fine morning and you have had a good Swedish breakfast and that you now are ready for an interesting and exciting shipping meet. My name is Mikael Kristensson. I live here on the island. I count myself as a part of the shipping community here. I'm a member of this church and I'm honored to be your host here today. First, some practical details. This is the place to be if you have signed up for the commercial and financing meet. If you now in horror feels that this is not what you have signed up for, please go back to the DSM staff in the back and they will help you to the right place. In case of an emergency, we have emergency exits to my right and out to the left and also in the back where you all entered in. Let us hope that we do not have to do that today. You find the restrooms out in the back and to the left. And please put your cell phones to mute. And if you just have to answer a text or an email, please do so in a discreet way, okay? Lunch will be served here at the church around 1 o'clock or just before. And we plan to finish here around 3:30. You will get the time to visit the exhibition area. You will get the time for networking. And of course, the big dinner tonight that starts at 6 p.m. So just relax. Sit down comfortably and enjoy the ride. This year, the commercial and financing meet will address the important question of how the maritime sector can become more green and sustainable. And also the question of resilience in the maritime industry. And I am very taggad, as my sons say, about this day and these topics. And we have a lot of interesting speakers for you today, including Andreas Karlsson, the Swedish Minister for Infrastructure and Housing. And I think we will give all our speakers a big hand and warm welcome. But before we get started, I would like to say a few words about this church. 148 years ago, in August of 1875, a young fisherman called Olle Eriksson was on his way to the neighboring island to visit the priest there. And he was in agony. 1 year prior, he had made a holy vow. That stormy September day, out on the fishing boat, he had experienced how his brother has been washed overboard and then unfortunately drowned. And then Olle made a promise to God. Now, almost a year after that tragic incident, Olle had not been able to get peace. He had made a promise to lay his life in the hands of the Lord, but how? And when he finally meets the vicar and tells him of his spiritual struggle, the priest reads to him a passage where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And at that instant, Olle got to experience peace, and he leaves the church a changed man. He immediately starts a prayer group in his home, and he invites preachers. This small group is joined by more and more, not without struggle or persecution. Eventually, they build a small gathering hall, then a church, and then some year after, they built this church that we are sitting in today. And today, this church has a lot of activities for all ages. Among other things, it operates a preschool and a second-hand store. And the church, by its members, of course, helps people both near and away in other countries. And for almost 150 years, this church has continued to be a place where men and women can experience fellowship with each other and with God. It has been the spiritual home where many people come every week to get new strength and encouragement. And as a church, we are honored to welcome you as guests here today. And finally, the same calling from Jesus Christ that Olle heard so many years ago is still very much relevant and true. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. All right, we will now start this commercial and financing meet with an introduction of the Donsö shipping community by David Christensson. He is the CEO of Northern Offshore Group. Please give a big round of applause for David.
We change for the future. At Donsö, we have always lived by this way. Since we started in the early days with fishing and afterward went from sails to engines in our vessels, we have always strived to make a change for the better. We are and have also been frontrunners in the aspect of environmental and safety, with, for example, the implementation of double bottom and double sides way before the international rules. We at Donsö has always strived to develop our vessels to be more efficient and advanced in all aspects, such as high quality working environmental on board, top performance in all technical aspects for a safe and efficient operation. And thanks to this, we always strive to be the #1 choice to our customers. We have always lived close to the sea and to the nature that has given us in our backbone an obvious environmental commitment. So when the UN Sustainable Development Goals was implemented globally, we just saw these as common sense, because all these aspects has always been a natural way for us to develop our businesses. We also want to be role models and frontrunners for a more including and diversified industry, that we are able to include more gender equality on board our vessels, but also to be implemented in all departments in our organizations. Research has shown that diversifications improves the development of companies to be more profitable and competent, and are more prepared to be able to meet the future challenges. The last 5 years, we at Donsö have invested almost $1 billion in new vessels. And the next 5 years to come, we will invest additionally over $1 billion in new vessels. The results of all these investments are approximately 60 new vessels in the 10 years period of time. If all these investments and vessels could have the possibility to fly the Swedish flag, then the Swedish fleet could increase to up to 50%, with some of the world's most advanced and environmentally friendly vessels. But to make this happen, we all need to cooperate in 3 main areas: industrial policy, such as good tonnage tax scheme that includes all types of vessels that are competing at the international arena; support for professional growth in the whole range, from the individual to the whole maritime cluster; and also overall Swedish shipping competitiveness, such as good employment solutions and situations for our onboard personnel. We as ship owners, together with our suppliers, our unions, and most of all our politicians, needs to work together to be ready to change for the future, so our maritime cluster could grow and thrive. We want to strengthen the maritime Swedish cluster and hope that we will have the political climate that make it possible to hoist the Swedish flag on all our vessels. Our vision is that the Swedish flag should be the #1 choice for all companies that own and operate vessels. We from Dunse has done our part. Andreas, today we heard some fantastic news from you. However, we need more than news. We need action. Please welcome Andreas Karlsson, the Minister of Infrastructure and Housing in Sweden. Give Andreas a big hand.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You hear me? Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the very warm welcome here to Dunse. It gives me an opportunity, the invitation to this seminar, to go a little bit deeper than I did on the first speak today. So I'll talk about what we do in the IMO. I will talk about what we do on the EU level, because what you know is that we are acting on a global market. But I will also elaborate about the government agenda to strengthen the competitiveness of Swedish shipping. But first, I would like to say a few words about one of your seminar topics here today, free trade. It goes without saying that we work for free trade in all contexts, and the benefits are obvious to us all. Unfortunately, there are countries that have a completely different view on that matter. Sweden takes part in an intergovernmental shipping network called the Consultative Shipping Group, CSG. The CSG consists of the maritime administrations of the government of EU member states, together with Norway, Canada, Japan, and several other countries sharing the same views as regards free trade and open markets. The CSG nations represent more than half of the world's operated gross tonnage. In connection with these meetings, my co-workers also meet ICS, the International Chamber of Shipping, and ECSA, European Community Ship Owners Association. During the last meeting in June, many countries talked about the increased protectionism in general, and that the list of reported problems with market access and disruptive measures just keeps getting longer. Every 2 years, the CSG meets the US administration and representatives and members of the US Congress to try to have a constructive dialogue on various shipping-related issues such as the Jones Act. We ourselves, and together with the EU, and in all international contexts, must continue to work for free trade and counter trade barriers. Earlier, during the opening ceremony, I said that in recent months, a lot has happened in the shipping industry, both on an international level, within the EU, and here in Sweden. We want to focus on the conditions for shipping because it is crucial and of utmost importance for our supply of goods and for our foreign trade. Shipping is also, and this is important, shipping is also an industry in itself that creates businesses and employment. As a tool for our supply of goods, shipping is important for our entire country's green transition, but shipping has its own green transition to work with as well. And we heard about it here, we have heard it before, and we see it every day. The business sector is paving the way for the green transition, and Swedish companies are at the forefront of this work. At the beginning of July, as most of you know, the IMO adopted a historic climate strategy. It means a tightening of the climate goals for the shipping industry and shows the direction for continued development of measures. When we held the presidency of the EU Council, we worked intensely on the negotiations in the IMO, and we can happily say that after several years of work, a revised climate strategy is now in place. The strategy is necessary to be able to move forward in the discussions and to work more concretely to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping. And once again, I want to thank all of you from the shipping community who contributed to this work. You have tried to influence international stakeholders and you have been successful, and you have participated in the IMO's negotiation meetings. I also know that the Swedish Shipowners Association already several years ago adopted ambitious emission goals for both national and international shipping. Many Swedish shipping companies, both here at Donsö and all around Sweden, invest heavily in climate and environmentally smart solutions, and you try to reduce your environmental and climate footprint, and you often go ahead of the legislation and show the way. As I said also in the first speak today this morning, you also see a good business case in this matter, to combine green transition with work with business cases, job creation, wealth, and that's why it's so important for Sweden and Swedish government, and it was important during the Swedish presidency to combine work with green transition and to strengthen competitiveness. It goes hand in hand. The work now continues in the IMO to develop and to agree on new global climate measures. It has already been agreed in principle to introduce a maritime greenhouse gas emission pricing mechanism and a goal-based marine fuel standard to increase the share of sustainable fuels in shipping. The work is expected to be completed in 2025, and it is important that the shipping industry adjusts and reduces its emission and that it is given the right conditions to do so. Among other things, the Swedish government is working on developing a new climate policy action plan that will be presented later on this year. I would also like to mention that we are working intensely on the Swedish candidacy for the IMO Council. The Council election takes place in December, and we work closely together with the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, the Swedish Transport Agency, and our embassy in London. The Swedish candidacy is of common Swedish interest, so please spread the word and take the opportunity to promote the candidacy whenever you can and got the opportunity. It is important on a global scale, but it's also important for us back in Sweden. In July, we handed over the presidency of the EU Council to Spain, and during our presidency, we were able to complete all transport-related negotiations in the Fit for 55 package. That was our aim in the beginning of the presidency, and we worked hard on it, and we succeeded with it. The EU has raised its ambition in shipping, aviation, and in terms of the charging infrastructure for both land and sea transport. It is good for the climate as well as for Swedish companies that are, and as I said, at the forefront in these areas. So I'm very proud of what we achieved during our presidency. For example, the agreement on Fuel EU Maritime means more renewable and low-carbon fuels, something that I know Swedish companies want to contribute with. The shipping sector's carbon footprint in the EU will decrease, and at my ministry, we are now looking at whether any additions need to be made to our national regulations so that the new EU regulations can be applied effectively in Sweden. The Fuel EU Maritime is important in itself, but it also levels the playing field for the shipping sector, and that's why it's important with the implementation of it. And during the next part of this seminar, you will have the pleasure of listening to Mr. Niklas da Silva. Niklas works at the permanent representation of Sweden to EU in Brussels. He works in my team with the negotiations in Brussels, and during the Swedish presidency, Niklas was the chairman of the Council of Ministers working group meetings when the proposal on Fuel EU Maritime was negotiated and took part in the trilogues with the European Parliament. I'm very proud of all the efforts that the Swedish team during the Swedish presidency did, and especially we worked with the Fuel EU Maritime. It was a complex and hard file with long negotiations. I think that you, Niklas, will describe a little bit of the work that you did, and I'm very proud of the success we made. And I personally bring many positive experience with me from ministerial meetings and the international meetings where I, from the country holding the presidency, had to present the entire EU In September, work will start again in Brussels. Niklas is actually taking a part of his vacation. The summer break is not yet over in Brussels, so it's great that you are here. But when the work starts again in September, we are looking forward to participate in the negotiations on the proposals in the maritime package, among many other things. So far, I've talked much about free trade, the IMO, and the EU level, and what's on the government agenda for Sweden. Let me be clear. The government's ambition is to strengthen competitiveness of Swedish shipping. We want more Swedish flagships. We want many different types of Swedish flagships. And we want more young women and men to choose to become seafarers. We all know that Swedish flagships contribute to increase employment for Swedish seafarers and provide training places on board for students. We also need experiences and the knowledge of those seafarers who have come ashore and started working in the maritime cluster. Swedish flagged ships and Swedish seafarers are even more important during times of crisis and during times of war in our closest neighborhood in Europe. A large merchant fleet, a strong maritime cluster, and a skilled workforce furthermore contribute to strengthening the Swedish influence in international negotiations within the EU, IMO, and other international organizations. With this in mind, we have taken several initiatives. In June, I appointed an inquiry to investigate a couple of shipping issues with the purpose of increasing the number of Swedish flagged ships. Let me be clear about the aim. I said it. The purpose is that we are going to raise number of Swedish flagged ships. So it's not just news, it's already action, and we are taking the steps already in the first 10 months, but we have to do it in a fast pace because time is key here. And the work with the inquiry, the man leading the inquiry is Mr. Rickard Engström, a well-known name to many of you. He now works at the Swedish Transport Administration Trafikverket, but was previously the CEO of the Swedish Ship Owners Association. Rickard, maybe you are here in the room. I don't know, I met Rickard before. The inquiry will analyze whether there are reasons to repeal the stamp duty, stämpelskatten. Several representatives from the industry have told me, that the stamp duty is one of the reasons why they do not choose the Swedish flag. The inquiry will also evaluate the tonnage tax system and propose measures to develop it. I know that Rickard will meet different stakeholders, and you will then have the opportunity to submit proposals for changes, and the inquiry will report back to the government already now in December. As you can understand, we want to keep a fast pace. Another issue that all of us consider to be very important for shipping is skill supply and seafarers' competences. We need Swedish flagged ships. That's very important, I said that. But Swedish flagged ship in itself is not enough. We also need seafarers on board. And we must have enough Swedish seafarers to be prepared for times of crisis and war. Today there are quite a few foreign seafarers on board Swedish flagged ships. These seafarers may, for various reasons, have to leave their services in times of crisis and war and to be replaced by Swedish seafarers. So we need to raise our preparedness even in this matter. There are several issues that are related to skill supply, and one is the education system. We know that the officer training is quite expensive to complete, and to be able to maintain a high quality, Chalmers in Gothenburg and the Maritime University in Kalmar have for some time wished to receive more funding. Already, in the government's first budget bill last year, we allocated more funding for the officer training at Chalmers and in Kalmar. It was the first step. And in terms of competencies and other requirements for seafarers, we have received several proposals of amendments from you in the industry. And we are now looking into this proposal. And we are looking forward to a constructive dialogue with all of you, and especially the Swedish Ship Owners Association and other associations, to give us the right view of which conditions we already have, but good amendments to work on and analyze. Another initiative I would like to mention is the Swedish Maritime Administration's Icebreaker Tour. The Swedish Maritime Administration tries to get more young women and men interested in working in shipping. They have therefore just started a tour with some of the icebreakers and will call in several ports along the Swedish coast and carry out various activities, mainly aimed at high school youth and students. When it comes to recruitment, you have yourself, in the same way as in the other industries, a great responsibility. And I know that you already take action. And the work that the Swedish Maritime Administration does right now is a part of that work, because we need to do the work together. You from the industry side have expressed requests for several years, and this is the main topic, the main news for today. You have asked for a bareboat register to be introduced. And as I mentioned in the opening ceremony, we have started work on introducing a bareboat register in Sweden. The work will consist of legal issues, and that the Swedish Transport Agency will need to add a bareboat register to the ship register. There are practical and economic reasons for simplifications of these rules, and in the long run, it can be positive for our preparedness. The stamp duty, the tonnage tax system, skill supply, and a bareboat register are all important issues. You have wanted to see changes in this system for years, often through your collaboration with the social partners in Blå Tillväxt. We have now, in the first 10 months in office, taken the initiative for change in all these matters. And as I said earlier today, we do it because we need to see more Swedish flagships, more Swedish seafarers, and to strengthen the competitiveness of Swedish shipping. When it comes to architecture and modern design, I think you can say less is more. Someone would claim that. But when it comes to shipping, more is more. We need to see more ships, Swedish flagships, more Swedish seafarers, and strengthen competitiveness. I would also like to mention some of other initiatives that we have presented recently. The government has started work on the National Plan for Transport Infrastructure. The first step is that we have given the Swedish Transport Administration the task of producing an orientation document for the upcoming planning period. We believe that a more developed and coordinated infrastructure planning is needed, which also includes shipping and aviation. Therefore, it is news that this time we are asking the Swedish Transport Administration for an analysis across all the transport modes as a basis for the new planning work. Because all transport modes are important, we need to have a holistic approach to them. The railway system, the road system, aviation, and shipping all complement each other. It is through efficient transport that we achieve increased intermodality. And this is a new approach when we take the first step with working with the National Infrastructure Plan. Further, the government wants to secure the train ferry connection between Trelleborg in the south of Sweden and Germany. The Swedish Transport Administration has therefore been asked and been tasked to propose measures to ensure this ferry connection. It is important to be able to maintain a functioning traffic if the train traffic over the Öresund Bridge or through Denmark should be affected by disturbances or completely cease for an extended period of time. So that's a matter of preparedness and to create a robust system. We have also given the Swedish Transport Administration the task of analyzing the conditions for reserve port capacity for the port of Visby in Gotland. Today's port solution does not meet the needs that may exist in a deteriorating security policy situation. A reserve port is of great importance, not only for Gotland's and national needs, but also in international context when Sweden gains NATO membership. The government has also commissioned an investigator to remove the obstacles to electrification of the transport sector. The electrification of the transport sector is important to create sustainable growth and contribute to Sweden's high climate policy ambitions. And all modes of transport are included in the assignment. Our ambition with the Ministry of Rural Affairs and Infrastructure is to link development of infrastructure and transport with rural development in the best possible way. For example, ports and logistical solutions are crucial for marine biological materials to be able to be transported in the food chain. In June, the government gave the Swedish Board of Agriculture the task of bringing together the industries concerned to jointly develop a long-term vision and an action plan to be able to concretize the continued development so that more of the fishing opportunities can be landed in Swedish ports and be prepared in Sweden. Finally, I would like to highlight the importance of technological development you are pushing to further strengthen shipping's competitiveness. I know a lot of companies are working with that are represented here at Donsö. I met some of them in the exhibition center just before. The government's task is to promote free trade and to update the regulations and remove obstacles in this important process, both nationally, within the EU, and globally within the IMO. Although we have several challenges ahead, we are working together to build a robust transport system. All types of traffic modes are needed for all of Sweden to function. We want to strengthen the competitiveness of Swedish shipping. We need to focus on the conditions for shipping because shipping is crucial and of utmost importance for our supply of goods and our foreign trade. And in times of crisis and war, the importance of shipping is even greater. Once again, I would like to thank you for the warm welcome to Donsö and for great talk so far. I'm looking forward to the rest of the program this day. And I must say, as a Christian Democrat, it feels good to be in the heartland of Sweden when you come to Donsö and meet all the entrepreneurs, the family-based companies that are a big part of the Swedish maritime cluster. So thank you again for the welcome. I'm looking forward to good cooperation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. To promote and to remove obstacles, that sounds very good. We have listened to what you had to say, and yeah, I think we're happy with the message so far. We are 700 that heard it right now, so
yeah.
So thank you very much for that you got the time to come here and to.
I think I can promise I will be here in 2 years again, and we can you can
Okay.
evaluate how the work is done. So it's not just news; it's also action. So we can come back and evaluate that in 2 years.
That sounds very good.
Thank you.
You're always welcome.
Great.
And a small gift. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A big hand. Oh, it made a good start, didn't it? And now it is time for the first topic of the day, green and sustainable maritime trade. How can the maritime sector get there? And as moderator for this first session, we welcome Britt-Marie Mattsson. A big hand. Britt-Marie, you must be the most experienced and celebrated journalist we have here in Gothenburg.
Oh, my God. Thank you.
You are the author of many books, and you have been awarded several great awards, like a medal from the King and Stora Journalistpriset. And we are very happy that you could come here and lead this session. The floor is yours. A big hand.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I think it's just great to come here to Donsö. It's actually the first time I'm here. I'm surprised myself. I'm embarrassed, I must say. But it's just great to be here. And we are actually navigating today, as the minister said, in troubled international waters with the war in Ukraine and tension all over the world. But at the same time, we have a focus at the same time, and that's ensure development of green trade. So that's the important thing, as the minister said, that we are going to have we have to look ahead beyond everything that is happening now and to be really focused on this. So, to be able to talk more about this, as the minister said, Nicolas da Silva, who is the transport attaché in Brussels, the government, for the Swedish government. So you're most welcome up here. And we are really interested in knowing what the minister was hinting about what you were doing in Brussels with the trade agreements and also with all the things that's happening to green trade. So please, Nicolas da Silva, you're welcome up. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, very good. All right. So, good morning, everyone. Yeah, okay. I'm very glad and honored to be here today. I have my background from the shipping industry. I'm a master mariner by myself, so that's of course mean that shipping stays really close to my heart. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm now going to introduce the first panel of today, and as you may have seen in the program, the theme is the greening of trade and shipping, but from a regulatory perspective. So as already hinted by the minister, I will dig into a little bit deeper on the regulatory framework that is happening right now for the shipping industry. And since I'm based in Brussels, I will of course then focus a bit on the EU agenda, the green agenda, but as we all know, shipping is an international business, so of course everything we do in Brussels, of course, will have huge effect on international level. So I would say that on EU level as well as the IMO level works very much together. So just to introduce myself, I'm a counselor for Transport Affairs. I work at the permanent representation of Sweden to the European Union, and that means that I then represent Sweden, I represent the Swedish government, and we do all negotiation in Brussels when it's come to the transport sector. So I only work within the transport sector. But we do cover all transport modes, so that means road, rail, aviation, as well as shipping. But of course, we focus on shipping. And let's see if I can change the page, which I cannot. Can you help me with that? Okay, let's see. Okay, here we go. Thank you so much. So, as already addressed in the title for today, we will look now a little bit on the green agenda and the so-called Green Deal that was announced earlier by the European Commission. And as you may know, during the summer 2021, roughly 2 years ago, the Commission published a package of legislation which was named Fit for 55. And the reason for that name is that these initiatives and this regulation should be able for European Union to reach the EU climate goal to 2030, and that is to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by at least 55%. Like I said, there was 13 different initiatives. They were in charge of different council constellation. 3 of them were negotiated within the Transport Council, and you can see them on the slides here. So there was the Refuel EU Aviation, which of course now focus on sustainable fuel for the aviation sector. It was the so-called AFIR regulation, which stands for Alternative Fuel Infrastructure. That piece of legislation is also very relevant for the shipping sector and mostly for the port infrastructure, because there will be requirement for ports to provide infrastructure when it comes to onshore power supplies. And then we also have the FuelEU Maritime Regulation, which was also mentioned by the minister earlier, which of course will have a large effect on the shipping sector and to be able for the shipping sector to also decarbonize. These three pieces of legislation were negotiated under the Transport Council, but as we also know, many of the other initiatives, of course, also have large effect on the transport sector in general, but of course also at the shipping sector. I have mentioned just two of them over here. We have the EU ETS, which is the emission trading system, where the shipping sector also will be included. We also have the Renewable Energy Directive, will of course focus more on the fuel, but other pieces of legislation will also of course have large effect on the transport sector as well as the shipping sector. But for today, I will focus a little bit more on the FuelEU Maritime Regulation. It's a regulation, which means it will have direct effect in all EU member states. So it will be implemented at the same time, at the same way in all EU member states, which is of course extremely important. The objective of the regulation, as you can see here, I think it's difficult to read, but it says to increase the use of renewable and low-carbon fuels in the maritime transport across the Union to reach the Union-wide climate neutrality at the latest by 2050. So this piece of legislation has the aim to increase the demand of these renewable fuels and low-carbon fuels, which then also will have effect on the supply side. Because here, of course, this has to go hand in hand, the demand as well as the supply. Just a little bit background on this piece of legislation. As I already indicated, it was presented by the Commission and proposed in June 2021. After that, of course, both for the Council, and the Council is where the member states are represented, as well as the European Parliament, of course, start to work with this piece of legislation. When Sweden took over the presidency 1st of January 2023, some of the files within the Fit for 55 package were still open and were not finalized. And as also already mentioned by the minister, that was one of the highest priority during the Swedish presidency to finalize the negotiation on all files within the Fit for 55 package. And FuelEU Maritime was one of them. They were still open. It was in the final stage of this negotiation, which means it was negotiation ongoing between the Council and the European Parliament. We call it trialogue negotiation. But it was not finalized. So as soon as we took over the presidency in January, we immediately start to work intensively with these files, work intensively with the European Parliament to make the negotiation going forward. We have, as our internal deadline was to try to finalize it before Easter in April, and we actually managed to do that. So in the early morning, around 5 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, the 23rd of March, we managed to reach an agreement with the European Parliament on this FuelEU Maritime Regulation. There was a long negotiation the whole night, but in the early morning, we managed to reach a political agreement. After you have reached a kind of political agreement, you still need to do some cleanup work. You need to finalize the text, which takes a while. So the text itself was adopted in July, just a month ago, by Council and the Parliament. And we are still waiting for the signatures from the Council and the Parliament. So the legislation itself is not yet published. So I just want to indicate here how fresh this regulation actually is. But it will be published very soon as it has been signed by both co-legislation. And I will try to not go into much of detail, but I will at least give you an overview of what this legislation is about, because as I said, it will have large effect on the shipping sector in a medium and long term. The scope of the regulation is that it covers all ships above 5,000 gross tonnage. And by saying all ships means that independently of the flag. So it's a flag neutral regulation. It means that all ships that will arrive in an EU port has to fulfill the obligation of the regulation. It covers all intra-EU voyages, which means all voyages that go between two EU ports are fully covered by the regulation. It covers also 50% of the so-called extra EU voyages, which mean a voyage between an EU port and to a port located outside the European Union. So all these voyages are covered by the regulation. The aim of the regulation is to reduce the greenhouse gas intensity that is used in the fuel. So that is the aim of it. It will not measure the emission itself. It's only focused on the fuel that the ships are using. And based on a reference value from 2020, the year 2020, then on average level, the greenhouse gas intensity of the fuels need to be reduced by the numbers you can see here on the screen. Until 2025, it will reduce by 2%, 2030, 6%, 2035, 14.5%, 2040, 31%, 2045, 62%, and finally 2050 up to 80%. So these are the numbers that are adopted and established right now. Of course, a regulation can always be amended in the future if that's needed, but these are the targets that are fixed today. Another important element in the regulation is also related to onshore power supply, and as I already indicated, there will be a requirement for the ports to provide onshore power supply. But in this piece of legislation, there will then be a requirement from 1st of January 2030 that all container ships and passenger ships above 5,000 gross tonnage need to connect to onshore power supply when the ships are alongside in AU. And as you can see here as well, it's related to ports that are covered by the AFIR regulation. So it's, I would say, larger passenger and container ships port are covered by the obligation, and therefore all ships that arrive in these ports are then covered as well. But from the 1st of January 2035, also ports that are so-called non-AFIR port, but if they have OPS available, onshore power supply available, then ships need to connect and use these facilities as well. So we have both focus on the fuels that are used when the ships are sailing, but we also requirements related to when the ship stays alongside. Of course, around this piece of legislation, there's quite a lot of processes that need to happen to be able to report and to monitor and to verify all this information. And the reporting period is always for 1 year. So it's the average greenhouse gas intensity that a ship has been using over a year. So a ship can, if they want, use different fuels during the year, but at the end of the year, they have to calculate the average greenhouse gas intensity and therefore be able to reach the target. There will be a verification done by independent accredited verifier to make sure that this process works and all the data are accurate. And based on that, there will then be a ship-specific fuel year report, will then be recorded and saved in an EU common fuel EU database. So that's the kind of process how it will work. I then need to emphasize that there are a couple of flexibility mechanisms built into the systems, because most likely all ships will, for different reasons, not be able by themselves to reach the targets. But there is a number of flexibility mechanisms that can be used. It can either be used as a banking or borrowing of compliance surplus. So a ship that be able to reach the target 1 year can either bank that surplus for the coming years, but it can also borrow from the next year if they do not manage to reach the target. There are, of course, some limitations in this as well, but there is a possibility. But then there's one more element here, which I have marked in green, and that is a pooling of compliance. And I think this one is really interesting, because this is a way that several ships, and there's no limitation how many ships, and these ships can also come from different companies. So a number of ships can be able to pool, goes together, and the aim is then that the pool itself, all ships together, need to fulfill the greenhouse gas targets. So that's mean for ships that are front runners, ships that will be able to reach the target, can use this allowance with other ships in other companies if they prefer, and to use this, and they can actually make economic and financial benefits out of it. So I think this is a really important piece of this legislation that will incentivize the front runners, the first movers, to actually do investment, to be able to reach the targets, because they can actually make money out of these allowances. So in that sense, there's a system built in the legislation that will actually incentivize the use and take early steps. Of course, links to this, there's as usually penalties involved, which mean that if ships do not fulfill the requirements, or if ships do not connect to onshore power supply when they are alongside, there will be penalties decided on these specific ships. And of course, these penalties will be quite high. So it will never be cheaper, so to say, to pay the penalties instead of fulfilling the requirements. So the penalties itself will be dissuasive, and like I said, it will always be more expensive not to fulfill the requirements. But they will be calculated according to a quite complex formula. But like I said, it will be cheaper to fulfill the requirements. There's also in the regulation a special provision that the penalties itself and the money that are collected for the penalties should be reinvested in the shipping sector. So this money should go back to the shipping sector. And if we look a little bit ahead of us, implementation and beyond, as I already indicated, the greenhouse gas target will kick in already 2025. We have the OPS requirement from 2030, so it's not much of time. So I would say that the implementation has to start already now. Like I also emphasized, the aim of this piece of legislation is to increase the demand of the different low-carbon fuels and renewable fuels, to also increase the supply side. And like I said, these two has to go hand in hand. And the regulation itself is also fuel neutral in that sense. The regulation doesn't say what will be the future of the fuels. And I know that this is a difficult question all the time. In that sense, it's fuel neutral. It's also focused on the greenhouse gas intensity itself of the fuels. But then, like I also indicated, there is this financial incentives built in the regulation, so there is this flexibility mechanism. So the aim of that is, of course, to support the front runners and the early movers, and for those who will be able to reach these targets. And it will also have effect on regulation on international level. This is the first regulation we have that regulates the greenhouse gas intensity from ships. We know that work is, of course, also ongoing on international level at IMO. And I'm sure that this will have effect on that piece of legislation as well. So here, the EU actually take a step ahead and show the way. And of course, we will do our best to try to accommodate and harmonize all legislation on EU level as well as international level, because that is, of course, our aim in that sense. So I think this was a bit technical, but I think it's interesting for you to hear, because as I said, this is a newly adopted regulation. It will have a huge effect on the shipping sector in the long term. As you saw, the targets are all the way to 2050. So I think it's good that we spread the word and know that this is happening, and it's happening quite soon. And I also want to emphasize that the aim is also to be able to provide support for the first movers and the front runners to be able to take benefit, financial benefit out of that as well. So that was a brief introduction from the regulatory framework now. And yeah. Thank you so much for your patience, and of course you can always come back if you have questions.
Well, it's really an impressive legislation that you have here, and this is in half a year. You must have been working very hard, I guess. So what have you wanted to do if you had an extra half year?
What I would do?
Yeah, more than this.
More than this. I would say during the presidency, this was our aim. So this is what we really want to finalize, because if you are in the presidency, you are chairing this meeting and you are in charge of negotiations. So the aim was really to finalize it during our presidency, because then we have a large role in that negotiation.
Were you surprised that you could agree on all this?
Not surprised. It was not easy, I have to say. There was quite many outstanding political elements where the Council and the European Parliament were quite far apart. So these final negotiations between the Council are never easy. I would say this piece of legislation, it was even more difficult because there's a lot of different technical elements where we have positions quite far apart, and of course also related to the ambition in the greenhouse gas targets itself. And of course, it's always you need to reach a compromises at the end. And it was also in the Council between the member states, because we had a number of member states that would push for even higher targets, higher ambition. But at the end, of course, you need to find that balance, so to say. But it is always tricky. But if you push hard, you work hard, sooner or later you usually find solutions.
Well, which nations were dragging their feet and didn't really want this? Could you tell us?
I shouldn't say that no one really wants it, but of course we have some member states that have higher ambition than others. I don't really want to name them today because that's not really my role today. But I think some of you may know who the suspect may be. But it is really a matter to find a balance, a compromise at the end, to find something that will be achievable as well. And of course, in some way also realistic. Because
you were touching on the implementation, of course, meaning that, do you think that it actually will work out the way you thought, or do you think that there will be trouble on the way?
I think in general, I think and hope it will work. There is still some details that need to be further figured out. Of course, for all legislation, you usually need to do amendments at some point for different reasons, which may most likely happen here as well at some point of time. So, I mean, you always review the regulation. The important element and interesting element here is also the link to international level. Like I said, I mean, here the EU are taking the first steps, leading the way. We know that work is ongoing at IMO and international level. Like I said before, of course, we always want to have the EU legislation and international legislation harmonized. But I'm quite sure that this will have huge impact on international level as well. And as I also said, this is also ships that are arriving in a European port independent of the flag has to fulfill the requirements. So they need, I mean, everyone needs to adopt in that.
And you will be the watchdog, I guess.
Maybe.
Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you for taking your time. You came just from Brussels yesterday and going back now. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So now I would like to introduce Johan Trové, who is actually the CEO of West Sweden Chamber of Commerce. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Minister, and great to be here in this church at Donsö. I will give you some new perspective, I hope. First of all, I have to say that I've been into the business of transportation and also sustainable transportation for many years. I worked for the Swedish Technical Attaches during the early 90s in Northern America. I was based in California, and when I worked there, I came home to Sweden. I worked as I said, legal industrial spy. I looked over what happened in Northern America, and I reported home to the universities and authorities and companies as well. One day I came back, 1992, I came back to Gothenburg, and I was asked for an interview at Göteborgs-Posten, the local newspaper, and I told about what I were doing there. And then I said that trends happening pretty fast. So now Volvo and Saab, they have to immediately start to develop electrical driven cars, because that will come tomorrow. This was 1992. I overrated the trend on a long term, but I underestimated, or the whole sector actually underestimated the trend on the long term. I did it on the short term. because it takes time. It takes time to change a whole sector. And this was 31 years ago. If we add on 31 years to 2023, we passed 2050. I'm impressed over all the numbers you presented, Niklas. Maybe I'm not that positive. So I will send that over to the panel. Just to give you another perspective of the word, this is one map we are used to see. This is another one, because that's actually the real map, how sizes are of different countries. And this is another perspective, where Sweden is located far up in the corner. But we are dependent on trade, and as you can see, we need, of course, sea transportation in the future as well. When it comes to Sweden, we are extremely dependent on trade. 90% is actually our GDP connected to transportation and export. And as you see, maybe Sweden is the darkest colored country on this map, which means that we are dependent mostly, more than most of the countries in the world. So we will, in the future, transport a lot. This is the places where we export today. Mainly Europe, but you see that the increasing markets are Northern America and Asia. So, what's happening right now? Sustainable production and sustainable services are increasing rapidly, I would say. And Swedish companies are in a leading position, world class in many areas. We see, for example, we heard about the electrification in the transport sector, which is a change that now happening, mainly on the land transportation. So I'm anxious what will happen in the future when the industry, the transport sector on land is going over to electrification, houses and industries. What will happen for the maritime sector? Well, I think that the transport sector will be in focus more and more, especially when it comes to the climate in the annual reports that actually is a new regulations from EU. That most of the companies have to report their emission from greenhouse gases, and not only their own emissions, they have to scope 1, 2, and 3, and then they will look into what will other suppliers emit. And then I'm sure that the transport sector will be in focus. So my point of view is that the maritime sector have to, of course, this is not new for you sitting here, look into new design for ships, maybe change old ships to new ships. Look into the alternative fuels that we heard about, the regulations and actually laws are coming. Of course, route planning, intermodal solutions connected to the land transportation. And of course, look into all dimensions of the sustainable development. But the key issue and the question is, how? I will point that out for the panel. If the maritime sector can't find production of alternative fuels, what will happen then? If the whole sector world change over to electrification, will the maritime sector will be the only sector that uses oil in the future? That's the question I will send over to the panel. Because I'm not that optimistic when I look into trends and changes that we will reach the numbers that the EU have set up and that Niklas actually presented. I hope we will do it, but I'm not sure. And I hope that Britt-Marie can actually point that out for the panel so we can get the answers. Production, in the word, no. And who will pay? Who will pay? And what will happen if IMO had set up the goals for 40% of reduction until 2030, I think? What will happen if they don't reach that goal? Will we stop the container traffic? Will we stop sea vessels? Of course not. So that's my questions to the panel. Thank you.
You were saying that we need to have new ships. And now we know that around 70% or something of the ships that are currently working are dependent on fossil fuel. So, and you say it's extremely expensive. How should the equation go?
That's my question too.
Yeah.
To the panel, because I see that, as I said in the beginning of my speech, it takes time. And now we're pointing out new figures and numbers for 2025, 2030, and then things have to happen rapidly. And we know that planning for a new ship takes time, building a new ship takes time. And when the shippers do not know which fuel is the fuel that will exist for the future, it's impossible then.
Could
So
you
I
say
think that you in the business have a hard time in the future to actually navigate to find the right solutions, and also to be connected to the regulations.
Could you see any country that is actually up front there, you know, adjusting to the new challenges?
We see some companies is in the front runners in the sector. For example, some of the ship owners here at Donsö, actually, when it comes to design and alternative fuels. But I'm looking into the whole sector. How will they actually make it? It's a huge challenge for the maritime sector.
Could it be tempting for companies, for shipping companies today to think that, well, we think about it, we think about it. It's tough times. We are in a very hostile environment in the world. We don't know what's going to happen. We wait a bit. Is that a way to think today, or is that really moving backward?
Both yes and no, because we were into this when I worked in Northern America in early 90s. And then IMO and lots of companies said, we're waiting, we see what's happening. And I'm a little bit afraid that we still don't know which way we should go, and therefore waiting.
But you see, Donsö, here they have understood. It's smaller ships than you can see on the international arena. But are they impressed, you think, when they're looking at Donsö?
I hope they are. They should be. And there are many solutions, and the solutions they found out here is great. But I think that the whole sector has actually have to change. And hopefully they will do it after the numbers we saw. I hope that, but it will be a huge challenge.
Is it too expensive to change?
Of course, and nobody wants to pay. Nobody wants to pay this. So we'll see.
We'll see. Well, we'll see what the panel is saying as well,
Yes.
because you gave away some questions to them.
They should have the answers.
Well, we hope so. So thank you very much. I will give you also a small gift here, one of the books. And Niklas, I just forgot to give you one, as you could have that on the flight, I think. But here, so thank you very much. Thank you, Johan.
Thank you.
Thank you
very
so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Niklas, here is some reading on the flight. So let's see. now we're taking the panel up here, so I would like to introduce them to them. Elvir Dancic, is that rightly pronounced? So please come up. Jag är CEO of Wallenius Sole. And then we have Bjarne Foldager sitting over there, Senior Vice President Mann. And we have Stefan Björk, who is the CEO of Green Carrier Group. And then we have Malin Collin, Deputy CEO Port of Gothenburg, or Göteborg, as we might say. So please come up, all of you. And so where is...
I recently changed my appearance from Malin Collin to
Ah, you
Patrick
changed your
Ben-
appearance.
Yeah.
Patrick Benrik. Oh, that's nice. I put you down. That's nice to know. I was just looking. I didn't think that you looked like Malin. But anyway, Benrik.
See what the audience thinks about that.
And this is Port of Gothenburg as well.
That's true.
Please, thank you. Nice seeing you, I must say. So let's see. Everyone has a mic on. So I might start with you, Elvir. So why not? So the challenges that Johan Drouet was talking about, do you have an answer to all this?
Yeah, I do. I really do. I mean, to give a scope, to do what we are aiming to do, it requires, just for the ship owners globally, 800 billion, according to World Shipping Council, to transship the assets. In addition to that, Ørsted and other companies to provide alternative fuels, additional 2.3 billion. Try that, right? $3.1 trillion is required, and we ship 13 billion tons of goods. I would like to see that procurement or logistics manager that's doing the math and seeing how can I carry my portion of $3.1 trillion. So yeah, I think it's a matter of cost mostly.
Mm-hmm. What do you say, Bjarne? Do you have an answer to these questions put up here? Or something else?
Yeah, I think so, actually. Well, I'm from MAN Energy Solutions, so we provide the technologies for the ships, or at least a lot of the ships. And at least from when we look at it from a technology perspective, I think we have some of the answers. Basically, the technology we need on board the ship is ready today. We already have carbon neutral ships that are more or less 100% carbon neutral on the water today. Methanol has been in service since 2016. We are burning ammonia on our test engines in Copenhagen right now as we speak, as we stand here. I think what is important is regulation. We heard Niklas about the EU regulation. I think IMO regulation is actually equally important, or maybe more important, because this really will create a global playing field, and I hope that IMO will be inspired by the EU regulation. And it was very important steps that were taken here in July at the MEPC 80 with setting the ambition, an ambition that is actually higher than the EU ambition. The end goal is the same, carbon neutral by 2050, but the ambition level set by IMO for 2030 is actually significantly more ambitious than the EU regulation. And setting the goal is a good start, but it's only also just a start. And now the hard work will take place in the IMO the next year and a half, where they have to define the actions. Will it be, how much will be requirement from the fuel standard? How much will be required from a carbon tax? And then it will have to be adapted in 2025 and effective in 2027. And that means from 2027 until 2030, 3 years, global shipping have to reduce 20% of the CO2, actually aiming for 30%. And that's very ambitious, right?
But to the two of you, isn't it tempting to stay put like it is today, knowing the costs?
Can you repeat the question? Knowing the cost, is it tempting?
Isn't it tempting to stay put doing nothing, knowing the costs of change?
Otherly it is, because sure, we take a lot of pride what we're doing here locally in our communities and Adunse and the others, but we can look around the world and there are many other shipping companies that are doing just that. It is tempting to stay put and see where this is going. And I think it's not just a matter of cost that's causing that. It is also a matter of a level playing field. Sure, Fit for 55 and all these regulations, they're on an EU local basis, but shipping is global, and unless we get a global playing field, which is where IMO comes in, that could be a trigger point that really takes this to the next step. On the contrary to you, I am optimistic, I really am, not because of regulation, cost, etc., but because simply of my generation simply saying, we're going to do this.
What do you say, Patrick, from the point of the Port of Gothenburg?
Well, from a Port of Gothenburg perspective, as a starter, we have high ambitions ourselves, as Elvi would know all about. I mean, we have said we're going to reduce CO2 emissions by 70% from 2010 to 2030. And we can also see on that map, on that chart, that some 80% or so to that reaching that goal is from alternative fuels from the sea transport. However, we don't order or build or buy ships ourselves. We don't produce fuel or storage fuels or buy fuel. So what we need to become is the natural meeting place and marketplace for stakeholders to come together like this sort of event and to have a pragmatic approach about it. I'd like to come back to that in a minute or two.
Were you surprised to see this legislation coming through this half year?
Well, when reading on it in the newspaper, one quote just stuck with me, and it was that finally the airline industry and shipping industry would have tighter requirements. They have been doing their business under the radar, was a quote from one of the EU politicians, and I quite like that. And I think, I mean, it needs to be put in the spotlight. And again, we know that for us to reach our environmental targets, alternative fuels is key. So, I'm pragmatic and optimistic, and I'd like to work with it for the next few years. Yeah.
Stefan, what do you say?
I think it's important to open up. I mean, I think we have been in our company and trying only to look for our company's success. We need to meet, like in this forum, like here. We as Green Carrier, we are not ship owner. Okay, we have our old Swedish East Indiaman, Göteborg, who is in the port today. But we as Green Carrier are making a cooperation with Wallenius and trying to find a solution here to bring a rural ship between North Continent and Lake Mälaren. That is something completely new, and we hope that that can be a part of a success. But in general, to meet and talk and be more open up, cannot only look for the money. We have also to look for the environment and for the next generation.
But you're entering competition, not just in this area. You're all over the world. You're competing with other countries, other companies. Could you see some of them not wanting to cooperate the way you would like?
I think there are many. I mean, it's new things for me. When we grew up in the industry, I mean, we took care of our own business and our own people. We didn't really watch over the border. But now, with the new situation, I think everybody realized that the climate changing, and we need to do something about it. We have to take a responsibility, cannot only look for the money.
Mm-hmm. But if you're looking at all this, like 70% or something of all the carriers are dependent on fossil fuel. That would be so for, well, maybe 30 years, something like that. Who is going to take the leading standard and change?
I think it has to be a matter of value. It'll likely be those that see that there is a business value in this. And it will not be those that are thinking short term, that there needs to be a business value in the P&L tomorrow, but those that see this on the long term. And this is, again, where I feel very proud to have that community of Swedish ship owners, because we are typically thinking long term in the industrials and in generations. So for that reason alone, maybe, I do think that we are and we will continue to be the front runners. Not necessarily the most profitable front runners compared to, what do I know, southern borders, but definitely those that will be here in 200 years because we are doing the right thing now.
Bjarne, what would you say to those saying, well, there are lots of words and you know, agreements and everything like that. Well, we have to see. What do you say to those who are hesitant looking at all this?
I think it's just important to highlight that there are front runners. There are companies who's transporting goods carbon neutral today. And yes, there is a cost involved. But actually, I know several container operators that are actually transporting cargo, containers carbon neutral today. They offer to the customers, they get a certified by a third-party certificate, their container is now transported in a carbon neutral way. And the cost is high, but if you break it down to each container, it's doable. maybe if even the fuel is 10 times more expensive in some cases than the fossil fuel, the extra price per container transported from Asia to Europe may be only $200-300, and you break it down for a camera or a pair of shoes or widescreen TV inside, it's maybe less than €1. And customers in North Europe and in North America are willing to pay such a small premium for certified carbon neutral transportation. So it's happening today already. The most important, because it is big investment in the production of the fuels, the most important is certainty that there will be a demand for the fuel, because you have to invest $1 billion to produce 200,000 tons of green ammonia, for instance, right? Nobody's going to commit that investment unless they have the certainty that there will be a demand for the fuel. But once the certainty is there, the money is also there to invest. I'm convinced of that.
Stefan.
Yeah, I think the politicians has to give us long-term playing field. The field has to be level. And if we don't know what the future is for the politicians, then it's difficult to invest. I think that ship owners all over the world have to be long-term. If you order a ship today, it takes maybe 2 years before it's ready, and then it should trade 25 years. So it means that you have to look 30 years ahead. And then you need a reasonable, clear sights. So I think that's the job for the politicians.
What you're saying is someone has to help with the payment, right?
Yeah, and then we have to pay
Who's
for it, finally. We as customer have to pay for it, of course. We cannot only demand, we also have to be prepared to pay, what Bjarne said, the extra £1 per pair of jogging shoes, for instance. It's £1, and you pay maybe 2,000 crowns today. So if it's cost 2001, is that the big problem? I don't think so.
Patrik, what are you?
Well, I'm back to us being the meeting place, marketplace, and we hear about demand, yeah, but also on the supply side, which Johan brought up and Nicholas also pointed out. And for me, there are technical aspects here and financial, economical aspects. But for me to see the decision that Danish Ørsted, together with Liquid Wind, took by starting to establish the first production of green methanol up in Örnsköldsvik, that to me is a super important decision, because that's the starting point of getting supply in place. What I would like to do from a, again, pragmatic perspective is that Port of Gothenburg, freight hub for sure, bunker hub also. And I mean, there are several actors in this room only that frequently bunker in Gothenburg. And I would like to see collaboration with them to see what's your future plans, how can we help each other out to secure supply, secure the logistics and the distribution and storage. But that's the technical side, the demand side. Supply side. Then, of course, there will be a price gap. And when we looked into that sort of price gap, the size of the price gap, and what I mean is price from conventional fuel to alternative fuel might be as high as a factor of 3. So even if stakeholders along the value chain put in their chunks, there will probably be, there will be a cost gap anyway, especially in the beginning, early stages when supply is very low. So for me, my main question is how to get over that first hurdle, how to get the first project running, and then second and third would be a little bit easier. But initially, say the first few years, there will be, as far as I can see, a need for some sort of support to get over the hurdle.
Helvig, you're looking some kind of skeptical.
Not at all. I'm definitely an optimist. However, I am skeptic when we talk about the 1 kroner. I keep coming back to the cost, because there is a general sense and feeling that the customers that we are serving altogether, they don't want to pay, or at the very least, they cannot pay. And I really want to call BS on it, because what we saw during the pandemic, whether it's car transportation, container transportation, nobody had a problem paying $20,000, $30,000 for a container. It wasn't green, right? It was just being shipped from point A to point B. So obviously there is an ability to pay. And to my best of knowledge, Volvo didn't go out of business because they paid 20,000. It is more the willingness to pay. So that 1 kroner, there is a lack of willingness to do it, which is why I keep coming back to it's what you believe in, much like standing in this church. Either you believe in it or you don't, which comes back to, I think those of us that are true believers in this, long term, we will drive it, not necessarily because we get to 1 kroner, despite the fact that we don't get it.
Johan, are you happy what you're hearing? Where is Johan? He left. He posed some questions and then he just left.
Not a strong believer, huh?
See, that's a strong believer. He believes in you. So see, do you think that you answered his questions?
I think it's a timing issue. I mean, we will do it. I'm 100% convinced. The problem is if we can find it in the right time, because we need more engines, new fuel, a lot of new things, of course, and everything takes time. So it's a timing issue, but we will manage. But I think that a winning company has to invest, otherwise you will die. You have to invest in people, and you have to invest in new products for the shipping industry. And I think in this Donsö cluster, they are really ahead of things. So I'm pretty positive.
So Bjarne, but we come back to the costs. It's really costly to do all these things. And I guess that your company will benefit some way or another by people investing. So how could you help that it shouldn't be that costly to be efficient in the green aspect?
Yeah, and that's a very important point. So irrespective of it's one solution or the other, with the fuel standard or CO2 tax, the fuel will be more expensive. It's already more expensive today than before. So of course, any drop of fuel you can save is very, very valuable. So any fuel efficiencies, any fuel saving device you can have on the ship, not only in the engine, but in terms of optimizing system, adding wind assisting, adding air bubble, hull air lubrications, sky sails, anything you can do to save. Every drop of fuel will basically, maybe the business case yesterday, say it's too expensive to invest in a shaft generator. Batteries are too expensive. But already, I think now, the business case have completely changed. So I think that a lot of technology can help to save fuel on board the ships. I don't know, I'm just stuck a little bit here. We are talking about that we need first movers, but the first movers are here already. I mean, Hennis and Mauritz, they have made the claim they want to be carbon neutral by 2040, including their scope 3, which is transportation aboard the ships. They're willing to pay this small premium today, same as IKEA. So they have stayed, and they're not talking about it, they're actually doing it. So it is happening today because these companies have to report their scope 3 on this new regulation. So they're forced to do it. And the shipping companies that are the first movers that are offering this to these companies, to Coca-Cola, to Nike, to Hennis and Mauritz, to IKEA, they are winning the business today. So it's a good business case already today.
And I agree, there are first movers, yes, and we see them. On the contrary to, I am a little bit more optimistic than you, Johan. I don't think this will take 30 years. This will take shorter. The question is, once the first movers become the mainstream, where the heck are we going to get the fuel from? In the ships. So there needs to be a synchronization effort here between those that produce the fuels, those that invest in infrastructure, and then the chase for electricity. So there's a lot of things here that needs to coincide together. And I do think that those first movers, they are getting more and more of those almost by the quarter.
Yes.
As far as I can see, Niklas is still here. So I thought that you might have a chance actually to tell him what you want him to do in Brussels the next half year. Do you have some kind of list there that what you would like to say to Niklas?
I think we need long-term agreement also with the politicians, that we know how they plan for the future. They cannot change from, we have new politicians in Sweden every 4 years, sometimes at least. They cannot change things all the time. We need a rule, we need a game plan, a level field.
But did you have a wish list?
Not really. I'm not the ship owner, so maybe the other guys has a better wish list.
But you have.
I have 2 wishes then. The first one, and I'm happy to help out with that, would be addressing the price gap. Again, it's a factor of 3. It's going to be a big one. The Fit for 55 package would partly help to close that gap, but there will be a remaining gap. That's one thing, to address that and to realize that we're going to be short of supply for a few years on here. So how to solve that? How to incentivize market participants established already or newcomers to start helping and make supply available. And for them to make such investments with the demand situation being a little bit rocky, that's sort of question. price cap, supply.
Anna, you have the possibility as well. So
Yes.
what do you think? What would you say to Niklas?
I also have two wishes, Niklas. And the first wish, we have a lot of EU support schemes today. Unfortunately, the support schemes are typically linked to like technical innovation or inventing new products or new technology, and we don't need that. We need, similar to what they have done in America with the IRA, we need the support system to invest in the production of fuel and the infrastructure in the ports, to your point. That was my first wish. The second wish, please make sure do your best to make sure we don't have leakages. And when I say leakages, I mean, of course, it will be more expensive now to transport goods to and from EU. And just make sure it's so complicated to circumvent, because ship owners are very
Resourceful.
Resourceful. And there's a risk that all of a sudden containers will be transshipped in Southampton because that's no longer EU, or in Morocco, and thereby sort of circumvent. And then with all the good intentions, we'll have the CO2 leakages, and we need to plug the holes for that somehow, right? That's my two wishes.
Elvir, what do you say?
Nothing to add. I think exactly the leakages and the support on the infrastructure side to make sure that there's supply on it. Perhaps the gap from 21 to 23 could have been a little shorter and faster, but...
I'm looking at Niklas, he doesn't take any notes. I guess you heard it before. Did you hear it before? Well, you just memorize. So, well, if you're looking at this big spectrum of green sustainability, where do you think, if you have to just pinpoint one single thing, what is the most important for the year coming, if we could take it that, like a slim slice? What do you think?
Well, I would say 2 words then, pragmatic collaboration. By that I mean start in small scale, show each other commitment, open your books really, and accept that everything needs to start somewhere. So even a small scale start is worth a lot, meaning, I mean, pioneers and front runners and all of that. But a small scale start is definitely a start. And well, we try and establish 2 green shipping corridors from our perspective. That's the Rotterdam-Ghent and Gothenburg-Ghent and Gothenburg-Rotterdam corridors. So obviously stakeholders interested in such corridors, please come and join us.
Stefan, you just brought this great ship here to Donsö.
Yeah.
So, well, thinking about what do you think that those in the crew at that time would have thought about the discussion here?
I think they will enjoyed it. And I mean, trading is for me that people meet. They talk to each other, they create opportunity, they create wealth. And it's also reducing the risk for war. When you talk to people, I mean, you don't fight with people. It was tough times, like it is today. But if we're talking about this investing money and taking the risk, these guys at that time, because it were only guys, they risked their life. We're only risking money, so that's very easy for us today, I would say.
But what does it mean now with these regulations, all these new laws that are coming into effect in the EU? You have companies maybe who don't have the money to invest. What do you say to them?
Well, depending on what company it is, but obviously if you don't have the money to invest, you shouldn't, I mean, at some point there's a realization that you shouldn't be in the business that you're in. So I think that the market regulates that. But back to your question earlier, what is maybe the narrow focus here for 2024? I think we all need to rally around the fact that ETS is coming and what the actual purpose of ETS is. We shouldn't treat it as a financial transaction between company A and B in the sense that it becomes a competitive advantage, rather to view it as what it is intended for, to reduce the CO2. So I think that, for at least for me, on a very ideological stage, is the focus for 2024. But when it comes to investments, I think there is, look, we wouldn't be talking about this, come on, if there wasn't business in it. It's as simple as that. The only question is, how do you put together the value chain, who plays what role, and how do we divide the cake afterwards? But like any investment, you reap the rewards, not tomorrow. You do it in the coming 20, 30, 40 years.
Björn, if you're looking all over the world, looking at other countries, other continents, nations, what do you see there?
Okay. First of all, I think it's important to recognize that the first mover are in, let's say, the North Europe and the North American part of the world. I mean, people in other continents, the global south, as we sometimes call it, they have other priorities. They have other things that is top of their agenda, right? And I think the global regulation, we have to make sure that we also, one way or the other, compensate those countries, because otherwise it will not happen. Then we can sit here in Sweden or in Denmark or North Europe and saying, hey, we saved the CO2, but it won't help the global world, right? So it's really important that we think about that this is global business and we need the global regulation. Otherwise, the transition will only be for a few converted people, so to speak, right? Now we are in the church, and not be a global transition.
What do you say, Patrick?
Around the world, what I can see when we visit or have visits from other ports, because I can only speak from the port perspective, is that too many ports, they take a too passive role, I would say, in this. Not in terms of wanting to, having high ambitions, but to taking and put themselves in the driver's seat and try to play an active role. And again, we don't own ships, we don't buy ships, we don't produce fuel and so on. We can't do exactly whatever we like, but certainly we will be one actor to try and do something, but we need to do it in collaboration, as I said before. But I can see too many ports taking my opinion, maybe a backward leaning, or this is not for us, we can't do so much. But I think we can do a lot, but together with others, yeah, that's my point.
What is in the pipeline in the Port of Gothenburg then? What are you having in the pipeline for green difference? Where is it? What do?
Well, first of all, I mean, we put the onshore power supply in place. That's not only one project, it's several projects depending on, I mean, for the different port terminals. That's the one thing we do. On the land side, of course, we develop the railway system through, well, all over Sweden and Scandinavia. We have built the first 2 and soon to come now the next 6 electrical charging stations for trucks. We give the green priority for trucks to enter and get a better working day, really, in the terminals, so they get the priority and can skip if there is a line. So several of these things we do. The one big challenge, again, is the alternative fuel thing. And I would like to, again, sit down with companies who already bunker at the Port of Gothenburg, try and understand each other's plans, help each other out. Maybe small scale, but we need to start somewhere. And then, I mean, we are the landowner. We can certainly find ways of moving forward.
Yeah.
I'm very glad you brought that up, Petra, because you mentioned earlier, Stefan, here that we need long-term plans. We know that politics ends up changing its mind, like they do now with the reduction in the drive, which is where I think we can circle around that. I truly hope that Port of Gothenburg now doesn't ease your ambitions, what you want from the trucks, just because the politicians said you don't need that much renewable fuel, right? Keep your high level. We could figure this out even if the politics doesn't always give us the 30-year perspective, which is crystal clear. We can do this on our own in the sense that we create our own playing field. So I hope that you keep that high ambition up.
So you had a wish list to Niklas, but now you have 1 minute each for a closing point. So what would you have as a closing point?
I would say it's not a single person, not a single company, not a single nation can solve this. So it's a matter of cooperation. We have to be more open to each other. We must put down more time to meet each other and try to help in order to solve this, I shouldn't say a problem, but we have a challenge.
Like this meeting?
Like this type of meetings, I think is perfect. I've never been to the ESM before, so I'm really happy to be invited.
Patrick, what would you say as a closing point?
Use the Port of Gothenburg as a meeting place. I personally believe in green shipping corridors as an enabler for this transition, meaning that, well, 2 at least ports need to come together, the shipping line, having interest in that line and so on that route, need to come to the table. Start in small scale, show each other commitment, and yeah, set a common ambition. Because, and again, small scale is worth a lot.
Bjarne.
I have 1 minute. Okay.
Well,
112 years ago, the world's first ships with a diesel engine actually were built in Scandinavia and left for Asia. And when that ship departed for Asia, they had no idea where to bunker because it was the first ship who needs bunker, at least diesel oil, right? But they managed to find fuel somewhere. I think it's in Singapore, actually. It's the same situation we have today. The technology for the ship is available, but the fuel is not available. Today we call it supply chain instead of, right? So I think what is really important is that we work together across the entire value chain. We must partner in a different way across the entire shipping value chain that we have done before to make sure that the fuel is produced, the fuel is supplied, the infrastructure in the ports are built, because then, of course, the ship owners will also invest in the ships and the technology that is needed to decarbonize.
Elvin, what do you say?
I'll just pick on exactly where you left off, Bjarne, here. Yes, there is a need to work across the whole value chain. But that also requires us, as ship owners, and us that work in shipping and logistics, to think slightly differently than what we've done in the last 40 years, where we have turned ourselves into a commodity. Thinking about a value chain also means that we understand our position in it, and you have the capability to create new type of partnerships, not the typical type that we've been used to for the last 30 years, which is you give me that and I'll give you this.
How optimistic are you if you have a scale 1 to 10?
What time perspective? Positiveness in what time perspective?
Well, let's say 1 year.
In 1 year from now, we will have the first, say, agreement between necessary stakeholders to say, we're going to go for this fuel from that day. And we have agreed on the deal.
Like a 2 or 3 or?
On a 10 scale?
Yep.
8.
8?
But in one particular, that small scale, yeah?
All right, so what do you say?
I think it will take longer time. So maybe 6 or something like that.
6 or something. Bjarne?
I'm very optimistic. I'm probably on a 9.
9?
Yes.
Oh.
Ship owners are amazing. I mean, we will always find a way to meet the target, right?
Elvin, what do you say?
Extremely optimistic. I agree. We see the world, we see it today thanks to ship owners and shipping adventures that started 600-700 years ago. So I'm very, very optimistic. At least a 9.
A 9, okay. So after lunch that is coming up now, I will tell you that we have an international perspective also with the securities and all the dilemmas that we have in the international community, wars, whatever. And Carl-Johan Hagman is going to take care of that. But first I would like to thank you very much. Thank you. And I guess that you in the audience, you can just grab them when they move down if you have something to ask them. Or if you want to argue with them, that's fine as well. As long as, with me, I must say, hopefully with you as well. So thank you for this, for the 4 of you, and I will give you one of the books as well. And after that, we have lunch. And the lunch is served, as was mentioned before, just behind us here. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you again. We will now continue with the second topic for the day, resilient maritime trade, a new security landscape. And as moderator for this part, we welcome Carl-Johan Hagman. He is the president and CEO for NYK Group Europe, and he is a very well-known shipping profile. I'm so glad that you will help us with this important and very relevant topic. A big round of applause for
Carl-Johan. Thank you. Tack så mycket. Okay, very welcome back after lunch. I see lots of people have dropped off, but nonetheless, I'm sure we'll do our level best to make this interesting. So the topic that we've been asked to talk about this afternoon, as our host said, is resilient maritime trade, a new security landscape, ? Now, we think that's actually quite interesting because here at the Doense Shipping Meet this year and in many previous years, it's been about the environment. It's the environment, and for good reason. 1 billion tons of CO2 that we emit, and how do we treat that? And then all of a sudden we come to DSM 2023, and the world looks a bit different, or really does it? So we will talk about new threats, old threats, how actually threatening are these new situations. And I think it becomes even the more relevant that those of you who listened intently to the minister, where he said both 2 or 3 times that how important it was now with a maritime policy, with more sea cadets, with a new registry, with a taking away the stamp dues that we've been speaking about for decades. And all of a sudden, this is happening due to the fact that Sweden needs resilience in its supply chains. All of a sudden, it's the security issues that have evidently been able to nudge our politicians so we got that very important landmark speech. Okay, so the setup of this program is we're going to have 2 keynote speakers, and then we're going to have a little panel that is going to discuss together with the keynote speakers. The first speaker is Dr. Björn Fagersten, who is the CEO of the analysis company Politea. He is a fellow of the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. He has his doctorate from the very well-known University of Lund, but has also been at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and many other places. Many of you will recognize him from TV and media. Björn, please, 20 minutes on what is the big picture we're looking at.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. Lovely being here. Always nice starting the working day on a boat, which I did. So I was asked to come here and speak about the geopolitics of trade flows and maritime infrastructure. And I'll do this in 4 kind of linked arguments, from the very general and down to the specifics of your business. And the first very general argument is that we are seeing the end of a unipolar era, which ushers in a new era also of economic conflict. And quite often when I meet business and talk about geopolitical trends, they are quite occupied by events. They focus first on Brexit, on COVID, clearly now on the war in Ukraine, the relations to Russia, maybe a big ship that is clogging up the Suez Canal, stuff like that. And they always argue or hope that after this, hopefully we can go back to normal. And I guess my first argument is it is the normal that is changing. So there's actually no going back to normal as we know it. So essentially, we've been enjoying a liberal order, we'd like to call it a liberal order, since the World War II, upheld by the United States. And since the end of the Cold War, this order has really become a global liberal order. The US spent some 30, 35 years as a sole superpower, but no more. We see that power is essentially diffusing from the West and the US to a broader range of actors. Clearly, China is the main rival, but also other countries are growing much more important, judging by different measures, but in general, power is absolutely diffusing from the West to the South, to the East, and also to non-state actors. And this means also that this liberal order is put under stress, and also linked concepts such as the freedom of navigation, the freedom of the seas, a concept very much tied to the order that we are now most likely leaving. And China, of course, is the primary rival to the US, and it's pretty clear that China is focusing its bets, its rivalry with the US, on areas such as economic growth and the control of critical technologies. Also, since both China and the US are nuclear powers, we see that most friction is actually taking place in what we call the global commons, cyber, space, and the seas. This is where we see increasing levels of conflict. Now, this kind of structural shift takes place at the same time as the world is witnessing a pretty dramatic technological development, or actually several. We see advancements in artificial intelligence, in quantum computing, additive manufacturing, etc. And it's quite difficult to see the consequences of only one of these technologies, and it's even more difficult to see when we plug them together, what we can actually do and how it will change. But what we know is that states increasingly see that the mastering of these technologies and the flows tied to them is really the key to security today and to national wealth. So states are much more competing over these technological and economical flows than they were just a decade ago, betting that this is the future of power. Now, this kind of end of unipolarity and that states are much more kind of playing a zero-sum game in economics It doesn't mean that globalization is dead or over. Quite the contrary. We still see that global trade volumes is to a large extent increasing. And in the case when they are not, where they are decreasing, it often leads to other form of global. If we move production from China to India, well, then China and India will trade more together and we will import more from India instead. More globalization, not less. But it's a different sort of globalization. Much more friction, much more conflict, and the global institutions that were meant to kind of facilitate trade is simply not as functioning today as they were in the kind of globalization era. So high levels of economic interdependence, which we have today. We didn't have that really during the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, but we definitely have it today between the US and China. But at the same time, great power rivalry. It ushers in an era which we call geoeconomics, essentially, where states use these kind of economic flows as political weapons against each other. So we see much more sanctions, export controls, and capturing of economic flows as a strategic weapon today than we saw just 5 to 10 years ago. So this is the new normal, and I think it is quite likely that it will stay with us for decades, because there's pretty slim chances that we will move towards some kind of total harmony in the world. When one superpower grows at least to parity with another, that is usually a long term of friction. Even if they belong to similar political traditions, like when the US overtook the UK. If they are radically different political systems as we see today, we can expect more friction, and that this will stay with us for decades. So, more friction, but what does this new normal really have to do with you? Well, my second argument is that the maritime domain really is at the pinnacle of conflict. I mean, the oceans today, they encompass pretty much everything of what the main rivals in the world are competing for and seek to control. A great majority of our economic transaction, the goods, etc., are traded and transported over the oceans. The critical raw materials that you read about every day in the news, which we also need to invent and to produce these emerging technologies, they also, to a large extent, travel on ships. Energy travels both on water and underwater in cables, and around 99% of the data we use every day to fuel our economies and function our lives at some point travels under the sea, on the seabed in data cables. So the sea is fundamental not only for our economy, but actually for our societal function. And we saw a little bit of that just during COVID, what happens when we disrupt the different flows that today flow over the oceans. And of course, the states understand this, so they spend a lot of money trying to control and affect these maritime flows. And I mean, after the Second World War, the US and its allies essentially underwrote a system of freedom of the seas, pretty much because it was the winners who liked this concept, and the countries who didn't really like the concept, they lost the Second World War. And this is a concept that we built essentially all our wealth on, especially in the West, but also since the end of the Cold War more globally. But now we see that this concept, freedom of the sea, is eroded or stressed by both state actors and non-state actors that are trying to restrict movement on and under the sea. Both China and Russia have established foreign bases. China has spent substantial amounts investing in maritime infrastructure. It's a big part of their Belt and Road initiatives in third countries. I think it's pretty likely that also civil investments from China could at some point turn into naval capabilities. We've seen that already in Djibouti. It could happen on Sri Lanka or in Pakistan in the future, in not such a far future. The US, of course, is also reacting to this, the fact that the oceans host more of rivalry with alliances such as AUKUS or the Quad in the Indo-Pacific. They also deal with it in their own industrial capacity, trying to get their shipbuilding going again. Just remember that when the United States entered the World War, they had about 700 ships. When the war ended, they had about 6,700 ships. So maritime rivalry is essentially a war of industrial capacity. While it's not a war today, we can see the states are really trying to get their capacity up again. So the world powers clearly see that the maritime domain is an area of, perhaps the most important area of conflict. So what do they do to try to affect each other in the maritime domain? Well, in a report that we did last year, we looked at maritime infrastructure and asked ourselves, so what do states actually do? Apart from trying to score commercial gains, how did they use infrastructure in the maritime domain to reach kind of foreign policy goals? And we saw that there were three main categories that they were looking for. Extracting information, essentially spying or collecting data that could be used for foreign policy means. Controlling and kind of regulating the flow through infrastructure. The most dramatic example is, of course, the blowing up of the Nord Stream line, but there's more kind of sophisticated way of controlling the flow through infrastructure, making it more difficult for your geopolitical enemies to use this infrastructure and easier for your friends. And the third part is that states often use infrastructure to build long-term dependencies, which can then be traded to political gains, either voting in the UN or some other gains. We see that especially in port construction. International standardization is one example. Countries essentially try to impose, especially China, I would argue, their own standards when it comes to infrastructure, which will lock the countries where they invest into a China's standardized world, which is slightly different and make it difficult for other parties. So the states are locked into long dependencies. And I think smart ports, which we are looking at now, is a good example of this. On the one hand, it's an amazing concept which could kind of increase efficiency, sustainability, manage kind of port digestion, etc. when we fuse data in ports. On the other hand, smart ports are vacuum cleaners of data. They suck up data for anyone involved, anyone who transacts or engages in a smart port. And this data can be used to kind of do research on our vulnerability as a society. It can be used for, well, taxation, but also for future sanctions against countries. So it is a very sensitive issue. And of course, it's lots of money involved. It's hard to move a port, so you build long-term dependency on the countries that actually invest in you. Essentially, it affects the security of supply of states. So states must be much more vigilant today about this kind of infrastructure. We've seen the cyber attacks on ports increase with 400% between 2019 and 2020. We've seen attacks on the port of Lisbon, for example. But also the actors, shippers who use these ports should be probably more wary, because most likely states in the future will be more sensitive on who you share your data with in a port and why. And I think this kind of pinpoints a challenge for the ports and shipping industry at large. How do you accelerate the much needed automation and digitalization without kind of increasing your vulnerability by sharing too much data? So the fourth and final argument is really a consequence of what I've been talking about, and it is simply that the shipping industry will see increasing levels of political risk moving forward. I mean, the gist of this 3 decades of liberal globalization was that the state and the markets kind of moved apart in different realms. States rarely intervened, and the markets became free and very successful. It was an excellent era, but it's to some extent over. Now we see that states and international firms are kind of closing the gap. They are cooperating more, and they have more needs of each other. And I'll give you a few examples on this kind of risks and opportunities this creates for the shipping industry. First of all, there's a risk to civil industry by the fact that more nations today are willing and able to kind of project power at sea. They are more assertive. We have simply more friction between states in the maritime domain, which essentially affects the civil industry in the way that they can become collaterals. There are more domains, flashpoints of conflict where it's just too expensive, insurance won't pay you, etc., so you don't want to do business in those regions. The Black Sea is a very current example that I think we will hear more about. Another example is actually not that there where we see conflicting state interests or sea power, but we see none of it. Essentially, the vacuum in some areas of the world where no country is really projecting power. Then instead, it leaves the maritime domain open for terrorists, pirates, etc., which in some areas is also on the rise. Then we have the risk to actual business practice that comes from this kind of geoeconomic age and the realignments that we see today. As I said, I'm pretty optimistic about globalization as trade flows. Trade is likely to actually increase and persist. But geopolitical considerations today is really rewriting the kind of maps of trade. And we already see the IMF did a study this spring, seeing that investments today follow a much more kind of geopolitical alignments. So states are much more willing to invest in countries or regions that are seen as friends. Essentially this friendshoring that we've heard about, it's actually happening, at least in the investment phase. And this is something that needs to be calculated with. We also see today that we have kind of shadow fleets that are servicing countries under sanctions, Russia, Venezuela, Iran. If we would see, so that in the sense is a separation of fleets, legitimate and illegitimate. But if we would see more friction in the system, for example, between China and the US or other actors, we can actually have a separation of fleets, where one part works with US dollars and calls some ports, and other fleets works in other currencies, calls other ports, and that would of course increase cost dramatically and call for new strategies. We also have this kind of strengthening strengthening ties between the companies and the states, and I think this especially is something that Europe tries to grapple with. And the concept, of course, of reflagging is just an illustration of this, that more companies today actually want to sail with the flag of their real home country. But that also creates expectations and opportunities from both sides that I think we need to be open about. Of course, from the state side, it is great to have more ships sailing under the flag. It at least makes it easier in times of war or conflict or crisis to utilize cargo shipments, etc., from the private sector. But then, of course, the private sector can expect something back. They might want protection. I talked about this rivalry at sea. And I wonder whether Sweden and Europe is really ready for this. The EU, for example, has lots of strategies about maritime power. It wants to be everywhere in strategy, but in real terms, Europe is very much investing in their land power. And I think this is really an effect of the war in Ukraine. Most countries now buy what they are lending or giving to Ukraine, which is essentially a land war. So the European states are to a large extent investing in their future land war capabilities. And of course, you can see this as a kind of grand bargain. Well, what if we in Europe, we invest in our land warfare capability in order to manage Russia, and then we let the US take care of the freedom of navigation, the freedom of the seas, and project power in the Indo-Pacific? I think that's a really bad idea, because again, we are fully dependent on open and free maritime trade to sustain our way of life and our economies. So to not be part of that protection would be unwise. We also have the issue of protection of critical infrastructure at sea, something we discuss in Sweden. Everyone knows it's important, especially after the Nord Stream, but who should pay for it? Whose responsibility should it be? Do consumers want to pay more for this kind of protection? We still don't know. So to sum up, the political world will not kind of kill globalization. You can relax, trade will go on, but it will look different. The shipping industry would meet higher volatility, redrawn trade patterns, and clearly increased levels of risk. And I think on the positive side, the shipping industry has shown to be pretty resilient and to make quick changes. We saw it both during COVID, we saw it during the disinvestment phase in relation to Russia. But I wonder whether the states are as resilient and as prone to change, because the states also needs to invest, I think, more in sea power to take the responsibility at sea. And so far, I'm not really seeing that happening. Thank you.
No, but Björn, stay there. You can stay there for 1 second. Just 1 second. So if I can just comment just on sort of, I said I wouldn't do this, but I just have to. So some of you might know I now work for a Japanese company, and I think it's just to underline what Björn just said. So China is 10 times larger than Japan. The conflict in Taiwan is about islands. All the islands north of Taiwan are Japanese islands. Japan is an island nation. And if there would be a conflict over Taiwan, it would hugely affect the survivability of that country. Now, just reflect upon the fact that Japan's largest import market is China. Market number 2, 3, and 4 combined are less than what they have with China. Japan's largest export market is China. Country 2, 3, and 4 combined are less than what China is. So here you have a situation where you are in a conflict situation politically, but from a trading and a prosperity point of view, it's completely impossible to decouple. We meet then Costco as competitors in every corner, despite the fact that we have a series of joint ventures with them. So I mean, just again, goes to show how extremely complicated the world is starting to become.
It is, and it's very difficult for politicians to actually foresee the consequences of their decisions. We have several examples, I don't have time now, but where states try to get the perfect geoeconomic strike, and it turns out to be a shot in their own foot, and they need to change policy quite quickly. So, which just increases the political risk for the corporate sector, because just things go much faster and states change track quite often, which is not what you want to see if you're planning a long-term investment. I guess.
Before lunch, I mean, the whole thing was about long-term planning, and of course the vagrancies of politics is something totally different. Excellent. Well, thank you, Björn. So if you sit there, we will now get some practical examples of this. And so if I can invite to the stage Mr. Erik Cornell, who not only is the CEO of Stena Bulk, he's had that position for the past 12, 13 years, maybe even more importantly, he's chairman of ITOP, the International Tanker Oil Pollution Federation, which is the organization that the world's largest insurers have collaboratively between shippers or ship owners rather, and the cargo owners, for preventing pollution, and a master mariner by training. So, Erik, you will give us some practical consequences of what Björn has spoken of that we then can discuss later.
Thank you, Carl-Johan, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me here out on Donsö, fantastic island. It's the first time this summer I'm here actually, and that's very sad. I live quite close by here, but again, thank you very much for that. So yes, a little bit, I would say more practical items or practical parts of what Björn just went through and what we see in the world. I will go through a couple of examples here in respect of maritime transportation, security and sanction landscape affecting shipping. Okay. Was probably on here. Yeah, and of course I'm coming from Stena, so I have to show a picture or maybe two pictures about that as well. And just a short introduction to that. Well, we are a few employees, 21,000 today, and we are in many different sectors, conglomerate of different industries. And of course, where I'm coming from is the shipping side, and with that. It's hopefully working here somewhere. Again then. No. There we go. Okay, there we go. So, and I am from Stena Bulk, and what we do today in Stena Bulk, we operate around 75 tankers globally. and we are around 500 employees, both ashore and, of course, on board the ships. Today we are proud of having around 70% of the Stena AB's revenue in our responsibility as well. And that is, of course, because of the rather good tanker market we had there the last couple of years. So, but then back and into what I'm going to discuss today, and that is the security and sanction landscape affecting shipping. And I realize there might be some small text for you sitting all the way back there, but what we're saying here is we talk about different region, countries, and other concerns affecting us in the shipping industry today. And to certain aspects, is I would call it the usual suspects when it comes to problems in the world, or areas where we have challenges with war zones or sanctions or similar issues. What is new in these countries and regions is probably the Northern Black Sea. And then also the bigger problem with the gray and the dark fleet, as we experience as well. And there are two different aspects of those issues, of course, that I will go into later as well. But what is sailing up here the last 6 to 8 months is something we experienced before, and that is some security issues around the Strait of Hormuz and the Arabian Sea, down in the Iran, Oman, and UAE area. So I will start with the Strait of Hormuz and an update of what's going on down there. And I think in that aspect we saw 2019. It was a quite big challenge down there, and we saw the security landscape and the tension down in the area went up dramatically for some 6 to 8 months. And now we are more or less back to the same situation again. And the reason for that is of course many, but it is definitely a relation between Iran and US that is causing the biggest problem right now. And just a little bit of context to why this area is so important for us. Of course, I mean the Strait of Hormuz lays between Oman, UAE, and Iran. This is the only sea passage getting out from Arabian Sea or Persian Gulf to the open ocean. And as we know, it's one of the world's most strategically important choke points. With 33% of the world's oil production is transporting through this area, and of course also a big part of the gas transportation, liquid gas transportation. And we have a number of OPEC members, as we know, in the area as well. And then due to the sanctions towards Russia, the importance of this area is of course even greater, particularly for our part of the world in Europe, where we have seen basically all the oil and gas from Russia is taking other routes than going to Europe. So by that, of course, a big part of what we are getting now into Europe is coming from this area. So what has happened then the last few months? Well, first of all, we have seen a lot of commercial vessels since 2020, and it's around 20 of them right now. And this is only official commercial vessels, but there is also unofficial numbers. There's actually talking about a lot more ships that are confiscated in one way or another. And I mean, the reason for that are a few, and one of the most obvious one is, of course, the political reasons, but also commercial reasons, and of course, at the last, the local smuggling that is going on in the area. And the local smuggling is probably the dark or the unknown fleet that is also confiscated by the Iranians at this moment. What we also have seen here recently is that Iran has been a lot more active. When 3-4 years ago, when we had the latest increase in the tension on there, they were operating quite close to Iranian borders. But now we have seen an escalation of the situation. So by that, they are operating all the way out to, well, more or less outside the southern part of Oman, if they have a need to do so, and want to take some political steps to take actions against what most of the time US has done to them. What we also have seen here lately is we have seen an increased military presence, particularly from US, but also other NATO members, and also Japan as an example. What happens as well, of course, is when you see the increased military presence in the area, that can, of course, lead to an unintentional escalation of a situation. And that is something we actually saw only last week, to some degree. Also, we can mention that the ships that are exposed to that transit in the area is not, of course, only US ships with US cargoes. It can be basically any ship that has some connection whatsoever with an incident that has caused the situation with that the US then, as a good example, or all our other NATO members have taken actions towards Iranian ships that for some reason has some reason for it, that they have taken the cargoes or the ships on board, or the ships that they have in the area. So a few of the incidents that we are talking about here lately, and I mean, I would not say it's a laundry list, but it's quite a few one. And the latest one here is that we saw, it was when Iran seized the tanker Nada 1, and that was actually suspicious smuggling. The high-profile ship, I would say today, that we are following very closely is the crude oil tanker Advantage Sweet that was taken in 27th of April 2023. So that's been laying in the area now since then, and of course the reason for that is that just before then, or quite long time before then, the US took over or seized the Suez Rajan, Iranian ship with Iranian cargo on board. And there has been a lot of discussions between US and authorities in both Singapore and US what they're going to do with this cargo. And 27th of April, Iran said enough is enough, so they actually took then the Advantage Sweet at that time. We have also seen other attempts from Iran's side to take other ships, and Richmond Voyagers was another example where they tried to take a ship but actually failed because of the US Navy showed up and they protected the ship with a little bit of warning shots and so on when they were getting closer from the Iranian side. What we see here as well, the last couple of weeks is that we've seen an increased pressure in the area. And there was only last week when the US Navy went in with a couple of helicopter warships through the Strait of Hormuz. And it was actually the Iranian was then threatening the warship to fire at them, which is the first time I actually have seen that happening in this area. That's a quite big step. Of course, what I want to mention here as well is our own incident that we experienced 2019. And when our ship Stena Impero was taken by Iranian Revolutionary Guard in July. And the reason for that was, of course, an increased escalation in the area. There were, during the spring and the early summer, we saw a lot of incidents where tankers were actually shot at and got fired. We saw drone attacks and the drones that was shot down. And a number of different potential incidents that could have led to a lot worse incidents than actually were. But nevertheless, why Stena Impero was taken was because of a ship called Grace 1 that was taken by the UK Navy in the Gibraltar, and by that it took roughly 2 weeks before Iran then took Stena Impero. The Grace 1 situation was settled around 6 weeks later. And she was released 18th of August. And the reason for why they took Grace 1 was, of course, they had the Iranian cargo on board, and it was the destination was Syria, and both Iran and Syria was under sanctions from EU and US at the time. But of course, Iran, they claimed their innocence and said that that was definitely not the case. When the ship was released 18th of August, they turned off their AIS, and they were getting silent. They were moving in all kind of directions, but a few weeks later you could see on satellite picture that for some reason they ended up outside Syria and discharged the cargo. So they were not completely wrong. Nevertheless, Stena Impero was taken, as we know, and we had hope for that when the Grace 1 was released, that something would happen to Stena Impero as well, and that the ship would be released. But sadly enough, it took a little bit longer time. But when it comes to Stena Impero, she was then taken 19th of July, 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Sweden. And what happens there when it comes to the actual situation was that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard went on board, took the ship with violence. She went to radio silence for 72 hours, so we had basically no connection whatsoever. We got the indications from different sources that the ship was okay, and particularly the crew was okay. But of course, this was always third-party information, so there was definitely some time there that we had a lot of anxiety around. From our side, of course. We focus a lot on the crew and also the next the relatives and the next in kin to make sure that we at least share all the information we had. During this time, a lot of interaction through different connections, both politically and commercially. And I would say that all countries in the region and the flag state was that is UK on this ship, and Swedish authorities all cooperated very well with us to try to find a solution on this. Iran on the other side, I mean, there's a political setup there with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard on one side, and then we have the elected parties on the other side. So I would say that it was a relatively good relationship we had with the Iranian elected parties there, but the Revolutionary Guard was something different. Further actions that happened in conjunction with this incident was, of course, that the security level went up in the area, and the UK flagships and I would say all the Western countries basically required that you should have a naval escort, a visible naval escort going through Strait of Hormuz. Good cooperation with the P&I clubs for sure, and that was involved in this. And of course, from day one, there was a lot of rumors about the ship's release, and particularly after Grace 1 was released August 19th, we got several rumors, I would say on more by daily basis, that the ship would be released very soon. But yes, we said we were practicing patience, and we did that for 70 days. And I will not go through all the dates here, but what you can say in short is, you know, there was again a lot of rumors about the ship should be released. We should, of course, we had a close relationship with authorities. And at the end of the day, you know, of course, there was on the absolute top level when it comes to political pressure from the Swedish Prime Minister. Boris Johnson at the time was the head in UK, and of course other countries involved as well, with the ship's cruise countries, so to say. We managed there through many different scenarios and a lot of back and forward. we managed to get the ship released the 27th of September, and we got to see the crew and the ship at Dubai dry docks 24 hours later. So I would say it was, after all, a good ending, but of course a lot of very tough situation at the time, and this is, I would say, today it is the situation we're living in particular in this area, but also other areas in the world, of course, where you have a lot of pressure and a lot of insecurity. So then we come to the war in Ukraine and the impact of the dark and grey tanker fleet. What we can say as a starter there in the Black Sea, the northern Black Sea, official numbers there is that there are around 70 ships that are trapped. They cannot get out simply because of the war. There's an unofficial number that is talking about a much higher number actually, and we have heard numbers up to 200. If that's true or not, we don't know, but at least 66 is actually stuck because of the war right now. But when it comes to the grey and dark fleet, this is a concern for us and I would say the serious shipping industry. And what is this then? I mean, the grey fleet is described as grey because it's difficult to determine legality and sanction compliance in many cases. And then you have the dark fleet. It's a little bit easier to explain what they're doing. They're simply doing illegal stuff. And moving cargoes along with deceptive shipping practices as well. We will come to that list later on, what that really means. And the last definition I heard was just a week ago was the dark fleet is bad, but then we have the worst fleet, and that is the zombie fleet. And the zombie fleet is basically ships that have stolen the identity or recycled ships, vessels. And there's a few of those as well. But you can see the total package of tankers operating in the world right now, we either grey, dark, or zombie fleet is around 1,300. And it's a good spread of everything from VLCCs down to MRs, you can say. And then out of the 1,300, around 485 of those are then operating as in the dark fleet. So simply taking pure illegal actions, carrying cargoes from A to B. And this is, of course, not only Russia. It is from Venezuela, Iran, and so on as well. But this has been highlighted a lot more now since the Russian war against Ukraine. And one of the really bad things here as well is, of course, that 2/3 of the tankers have no known P&I coverage, and around 20% has no, or they have a class that is unknown, at least for the shipping industry. So just a little bit, what is the grey, dark, and the zombie fleet doing? The grey and the dark and the zombie fleet are all into the falsifying cargo documents and using ship-to-ship transfers to manipulate documents. And there's a lot of false flags and and flag hopping, and of course complex ownerships. That means that it's very difficult to track down what is right and what is wrong. And if you want to try to catch someone, it's very, very difficult. And then when it comes to the dark and zombie fleet only, that's a lot of playing with data and everything from moving positions to getting other identities of ships to identity laundering and so on. And when it comes to the zombie fleet, I just explained what that was. So I think we can leave it there. So what are the risks then with the deceptive ship owners? Well, the dark tanker fleet poses a real threat to the reputation that the tanker industry has built up for many, many years. With all the work we have done in the tanker industry for the last 40 years, building up the quality and probably have the least of incidents in the whole marine sectors actually today, with everything, all the actions we have taken to make the tanker industry safe. And of course, it put the lives of seafarers at risk due to low quality ships and crew, and of course also low quality ship management. Same thing goes for the environment. The risk that something will happen with the dock and particularly the summer fleet is of course very high. We could see there on the age profile as well. You know, it's most of the ships are about 20 years when it comes to the dock fleet, or definitely about 15 years. And on top of that, the quality as such, you know, it's very very low all in all. So, and also, of course, it exposes serious ship owners to the situation if we would have an accident with any of those ships, both financially and reputational-wise, it would definitely be a quite big issue as well for us if that would happen. We haven't seen it yet, but we are, of course, a little bit, we are just waiting for it to happen. So.
2-minute warning.
Yeah, 1 minute left.
Good.
Yeah. So. Thank you. There we go. We go to the next one. And the tanker logistics. What we have seen in the last few months here is, of course, a big change in trading patterns. And we can see that here. I mean, from Russia to Far East and down to Brazil and South America. And then, of course, we see cargo flows going from Arabian Gulf and the US into US to Europe. And that, of course, creating longer distances, and well, I would say it's good to be a tanker owner right now in this respect, but for wrong reasons. So what do we need to change then? Well, of course, we need changes in many policies and regulations to limit the global dangerous exposure for the grey and dark fleet. IMO and all countries that practicing serious shipping need to jointly work to move the dark fleet out of business. Clear regulations of what the P&I clubs can do and not do in respect of insurance. And then, of course, put pressure on flag states that include ships from dark fleet in their registers. Thank you very much.
All right. Good going. Good going. A hand for Eric. Okay. So just to reflect on Eric's sort of thing, I had 3 things, actually, sort of what you said. How important the Hormuz Sound is right now for Sweden. Previously, we imported gas and oil from Russia to Europe. Right now, that comes from the US, but actually much more so from Qatar. So Sweden's dependency on the Hormuz Sound has risen astronomically, while we have a public conversation about deglobalization or regionalization. Well, basically, European energy security is probably more threatened today in this area ever than before. As you were showing, that these activities were not 2019, they're ongoing sort of still today. The second is because we have our Coast Guard friends here. So Eric was kind and he said 2/3 of the dark fleet probably didn't have insurance coverage. Well, if we have the Swedish Club people here, I wouldn't think the Swedish Club would insure one single vessel in the dark fleet, as I'm sure neither Skuld or Gard would either for that matter. So 100% of the dark fleet doesn't have IG coverage. Now, empty tankers that go through Öresund, well, you don't go empty through Öresund to do anything but to load in Russia. There's nothing else to load. I live down in Öresund, and we have many a day. Please, Mr. Coast Guard, do your job. Now, we need help to clean up a situation which is very complicated. And for the rest of you, without insurance coverage, it's the taxpayer that's going to pay. So it's really in our vested interest, I think. And on the Black Sea fleet, just a short comment of your 60 vessels, actually 3 Cape-size vessels, 170,000 tonners are NYK vessels. And that's my segue into our panel, because it's not only, though, that this is cargo and vessels stuck there, but the poor crew has been there now for 180 days. So, Eric, if you can still stand there, and we will ask Björn to move over here while I ask Emma Israelsson to come to the stage. Captain, whoa! Ja, du får gärna stå här. And Emma is cargo superintendent at Wallenius Wilhelmsen. Yes, yes. And then we have Niklas Granholm, who is Deputy Director of Studies, Swedish Defense Research Institute. Oh, very famous guy also. You know him from TV. And then we have Captain Thomas Fransson, Head of Security at Port of Gothenburg. Yes. And the man in the uniform, Colonel Fredrik Herlitz, who is commanding officer of the Marine, Älvsborgs Marine Regiment. There we go, there we go, okay. Okay, so the purpose now, we have roughly 30 minutes. We're going to talk about threats for about 10 minutes, then we're going to talk about mitigants for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to have a 10-minute conversation about the materiality of these threats. You could argue we've had lots of threats during the course of history, and therefore maybe we can manage this actually quite well, or we cannot. That's what this panel will discuss, together with the benign support of Björn and Eric. But if I can start with Emma. So Emma does not have the very famous position of being the only female speaker here today. And I think it says oceans that what a job sort of we have to do as an industry, and how happy that we are here. So I'll give you some more airtime. So before we talk about threats, and we've asked Emma to speak about how it is to be on board a vessel in the Gulf of Aden when these things happen. But Emma, could you just sort of, what do you do at Wallenius Wilhelmsen, and what does a working day for you look like? Because it really is sort of, I think you are a role model for many young people.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I work as a cargo superintendent at Wallenius Wilhelmsen. So I'm like the link between the port and Wallenius Wilhelmsen. So when the vessel attends the port, I'm there to load the vessel and make sure that the cargo is secured on board safely, that we have a good flow and utilization and so on. And before the port call, I also check the cargo so everything is secured right. If you have a transformator 90 tons, I make sure that it's secured correctly. We have like the roll trailers that we put the cargo on, and then also make sure that it's secured on board to the deck. Yeah.
And is it a big difference working on land compared to being ashore or afloat, rather?
Well, yeah, I can come home every day. Yeah, that's a big difference, and yeah, it's a big difference. Yeah, but
I think Emma is such a great experience or example of sort of the career opportunities that you started to see, you can continue to see, or you can end up as a cargo planner.
Yeah, exactly, because that's what I loved about working at sea, because you have to do so much different things. You sail the boat, you have the cargo operation, you are responsible for the safety on board, you have to be a doctor sometimes, and yeah, it's a lot of different things you need to know about, so it's very fun. I miss the view, though.
The
yeah,
view.
yeah. The office view, yeah.
No, we were joking over lunch saying it's the job with the most beautiful view in the world.
Exactly.
A sunrise in the Indian Ocean. Well, Emma, would you want to sort of, you were roughly 25 years old when you were a cadet on board. You sailed on a car carrier down in the Gulf of Aden. You were sort of the environment that Eric described. Could you say something about that?
I was around 20 years because I was finished around 23. Yeah, but never mind. Gulf of Aden, yeah, we went from Singapore and preparing for the high-risk area. And what we did was that all crew come together and prepare the ship. Like we put barbed wire around the ship, because in Gulf of Aden there was a lot of piracy going on in 2009 when we were there, and also prepare the hoses, fire hydrants, and so on. And yeah, we had the drills, of course, the pirate drills, to prepare ourselves to be on top. And when we got closer, I can remember the feeling that, what's that ship? Is it a fisherman or is it something else? So yeah, it was, all the crew was on the toes, so to speak, yeah.
So I mean, the point we're trying to make, I think, is that this is not only about sort of ensuring that there are cargo flows around the world. It's not only ensuring that the vessel so that the ship owner can do reasonable business, but it's a work hazard issue for almost 3 million people, or depending 2 or 3, depending how we count, around the world where you have conditions that would never have been acceptable if we were on land. Now, just because we're at sea, Emma, as a 20-something, needs to be sleepless because you don't know what kind of vessel is approaching.
No, I didn't feel unsafe at that time. Maybe I was young and dumb. No, I don't know. I mean, like the situation on board, of course, everyone is on their toes, but I didn't feel unsafe because I think also at that time the military were present in the area, but of course we didn't have like we didn't go in a convoy or like that. No, we didn't.
But the key word, the military was present in the area. I mean, the difference of knowing that there is help out there.
Yeah.
And I guess, I don't know if you just again want to elaborate on the fact that you're out at sea, you're all by yourself, but knowing that there is a military vessel out there, I would think makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, if you know there are a helping hand nearby, of course you feel more safe. I mean, even if you go on the North Sea, if something happened, it's good to know that there is a helicopter assistance available and you don't have to wait.
No.
So, yeah, that's important.
So Niklas, if we move over to you, sort of. Sure. So now you have the setting. This is happening. And we had the minister this morning, just all of a sudden talking about, or taking significant interest in maritime issues because of security concerns. Can you say something about the sort of how trade and prosperity influence security policy in Sweden or in Europe for that matter?
Absolutely, and I think that this will be a bit of a repetition of what Björn said earlier here, but repetition is the mother of all knowledge, as we all know. But the point here is, I think that the realization that the importance of the sea and the dependence on the sea has now come to the fore of decision makers. And that's been very clear here in the past few years, and you can see a gradual increase in this. This is, what's feeding into this is, of course, the sort of macro global level here. And what I see there is that we have a fast relative redistribution of resources for power and influence on the global level. And this is something that's happened before, and outcomes of this are very difficult to predict. So we are somewhere setting a course here somewhere, but we don't really know the destination. And these shifts have happened before in history. They've been unpredictable, they've been sometimes very costly and even very bloody. So I think we have to take that into account as well. We also see a challenge to the multilateral arrangements that we've had, the liberal order, which is sort of started in 1945, supported by the US Navy mainly. And we also get a challenge to these by other multilateral arrangements or minilateral arrangements, all kinds of acronyms that are now occurring here that we can see. Is this a competition with the existing ones, or are they complementary? I think it's a bit of both. The second thing that's happening is also, which we are also in the beginning of realizing, that's climate change. And that's going to be a very much more of a challenge than we might think, and also for the shipping business. We heard earlier, I think it was Elvir who said that we actually have a very resourceful people are the ship owners. That's true, and that's going to be needed. And we can already see now that discussions on whether the limitations of traffic through the Panama Canal is related to the lack of water. And this is something that happens occasionally, but much more frequently in recent years. And of course, the Arctic, where you have a very fast ice melt going on here, possibly new transoceanic sea lanes opening up. There's a big debate about that. But it actually influences the circumstances where you can actually do shipping operations. High frequency
we're
of storms.
not so negative, Niklas, because we take
negative
solace in what Björn said, that there's friction and there is change, but that doesn't mean that we're going to stop trading with each other.
No,
So it's just going to be a bit more
I didn't say it would stop trading with each other, but the patterns are changing, and I agree with Björn on that one as well. But there could also be a scaling up of this, and I think a scenario, not a prognosis, but a scenario of something which is more or less catastrophic could happen. We cannot rule this out. And what is then the plan B for ship owners? I mean, however resourceful you are, there's a limit to what you can do. But I think that it would be useful to think that through. What would be the options, the worst case options here? And this is something we tend to tend towards at the FOI as well. We like that kind of the big comet strikes, and how do you actually manage that?
Okay, worst case options. Thomas Fransson, you sort of go to bed in the evening. You're responsible for, by far, Sweden's largest ports. What are your worst case options, or what are you worried about?
Well, I can tell you this, if you come to Port of Gothenburg, you can feel safe. We have a very high security level, but of course, there's a lot of threats going on. We have a lot of legislation, terrorist legislation, that we are prepared for. But right now, the level in Sweden has risen. Of course, that affects us in some ways. And we have the Ukraine crisis, or the war in Ukraine. That lifted the light on us in a different way, because we have about 30% of the import and export. We import into Finland, to Norway, and so on. So we are interested for foreign power, and that's a threat that's quite new for us. There's a legislation, säkerhetsskyddslagen, of course, where the secret police gives us a dimensionerande antagonistisk förmåga.
No, we're doing this in English. Try that one in English.
I have some problem with that, but it gives us a direction where we should see and look for threats, and how we would build our security to ensure that we are ready for them.
And can you be a bit granular? So what kind of threats are you looking for?
For example, espionage for critical infrastructure. Of course, there's a lot of different infrastructure in the harbor at our sites that are interesting for someone to know if they want to put us out and make us not work. But I would say that the most important for port security is to build a security system to keep the goods hub open in all threat levels, because that's our main task.
And do you see difference between threats? I mean, burning of Qurans, general threats to Sweden from one-off sort of players versus what Niklas spoke about was sort of geopolitical sort of shifts. Do you sort of, a threat is a threat for you, or do you make distinctions?
I would say that the security work and the threats are the normal for us. It's organized crime, it's stowaways, it's all the things we work with every day. That's the normal picture. But above that, it comes to the dimension of foreign power and so on. But mostly our security guards and security centrals and the teams work with those threats, criminals and so on.
Okay. And then we have Fredrik here. So many in the room, I'm looking at Cecilia and others, have worked very hard for us to get our own regiment in Gothenburg. Can you imagine today if we hadn't had Älvsborg's Marine Regiment? Then I think we'd have had a very different conversation. You do not understand how happy we are that you are here, Fredrik. What do you see as threats to this part of Sweden?
Well, first of all, I've seen the range of threats have risen from pirates, terrorists, working in Afghanistan, Chad, Mali, and so forth, that we've been doing for the past 25 years or so. And now the threats ranging up to and including nuclear weapons. So now we have the full range of pirates still operating in the Gulf of Aden. We still have the threat for our mostly embassies now in Afghanistan or where we have left, up to a foreign power. Russia is actually involved in a war in Europe. Therefore, you have the full range of threats that you need to take care of. And the security situation in our region, but also in Sweden, has moved downhill basically very fast, which means that we need to reestablish military capabilities faster. And that comes to a price, and that price might be our ability to send forces down in the Gulf of Aden. But that is also something that we need to take care of in the community of different EU or NATO or other partnerships. But the range of threats has risen, and our capabilities need to rise to ensure that. But missiles, we see the cruise missiles and ballistic missile used in Ukraine. That is a threat that I'm worried about. We see the rules and regulations from Russian side. They don't use the Geneva Convention, the laws of war. So we have to take that into account in how fast we build things and how to counter the threats. So it's a challenging world for us. At the same time, we need to reestablish new regiments, like the Ellsborg Marine Regiment, which is celebrating 2 years in October, and we need to do it faster. And the other thing, which I'm glad to hear, is when people are talking about the reputation of mariners or reputations of the society, that's something that's being coerced by different powers now. Burning a Quran, is that something that one man is doing, or is it actually being paid or encouraged by other parties or countries? And the reputation, the division in society, that hurts us. But that's also something that we need to address, working much closer together. Coast Guard, we know you do your job, for instance, so I'm happy to cooperate with all different parts of society, including civil agencies and also civil parties.
But could you be so specific so that that's sort of the next 1 or 2 weeks in the Gothenburg area? Are we threatened, and how would such a threat look like?
I would say just now it's not a big threat, but the Baltic Navy, the Russian Navy, just passed through.
That's right.
Conducted a very large naval exercise together with the North Fleet, trying to basically move from pincer movement in 2 directions, and their purpose is to stop or block the NATO reinforcement coming in from the US. That's their war plan, and they are conducting that exercise. And they have just completed that exercise. So basically, there is a threat to this area, mainly intelligence gathering right now. We have the terrorist threats that's just been increased in Sweden as overall. And that is something in conjunction with a power that wants to play on all the keys on the piano can actually use. So that's the threat that I see now.
Thomas?
I must say we have a lot of cooperation in Gothenburg and with other harbors, and of course with the regiment here. When the Ukraine crisis came, we decided, the board decided that we have to run fast, and I use Fredrik's words, dig where you stand. So we started. So now we have, in a very short time, we have krigsorganisation, war organization. Right. We have krigsplaceringar, placed personnel for all the Gothenburgs, Port of Gothenburg. Yep. All our terminals, also we have war agreements with, and they also have this organization in place, and even operators of railroad and so on. So we have come very, very far, but there's a long way to go to have, we have plan 1 now, it's coming 2.0 soon.
Right, but we're not going to go to the mitigants right yet, so we're just going to do, can I just ask Björn, do you have any reflections on sort of threats to this area or to Swedish trade, so sort of when you've heard what the panelists have said?
Yeah, first of all, just to agree with the assertion of the intelligence picture, I think that is something where we probably need to see much more, you mentioned the Coast Guard, but also kind of public-private cooperation. I mean, traditionally, states collected intelligence and they used it. Today, most of this kind of critical infrastructure that is also used to collect intelligence, cables, sensors, ships, etc., are privately owned, but the state needs the information. So we need to see much more elaborate cooperation without becoming, I mean, the same structure as in China, where essentially everyone is mandated to collect information. But we need to draw that limit somewhere. I'm not sure really exactly how, but we definitely need to see much more cooperation between the private and the public. And then just on, Nicholas brought up the issue of the kind of the very different futures, and I think that's probably the most telling perspective right now. The kind of the range of plausible futures is expanding. I mean, who would have expected 10 years ago that the Republican frontrunner in a campaign just took his mugshot? No one, but he did.
Scary. Niklas wanted to say something.
I think we can add also to that we also have an upcoming Swedish membership into NATO, and that actually changed the setup quite a lot. And I can speak for hours about this if you like, but we don't have hours. But the main point, I think, from the naval side, that we're going from a setup where we had a defensive naval strategy nearly exclusively focused on the Baltic Sea. And now we are coming into a context where it's a matter of sea control, and where you also have geographic focus that is broadening. And I think the structure that is now being discussed and planned with new and bigger ships for the Royal Swedish Navy, an upscaling which we've seen parts of the Marines, Swedish Marines, and turning it into actually an archipelago fleet in the next 10 years.
Okay,
This
but
is similar to the solution we had 200 years ago. And lastly, also new submarines.
Yeah.
That
I
matters
don't
in
want to
that
get ahead of
context.
you because they are the mitigants. So before you tell us what we need, Emma is going to tell us what she wants. Now, the whole point is, I understand the government has plans or no plans, but we heard from the minister and we heard from David that we want to have more Swedish vessels under Swedish flag. So don't let the government tell us what we need. Now, let's try to formulate, before you guys give the answers, Emma, when you are sailing around sort of in Aden, or for that matter on your DS vessel here, for you to be safe and for you to be able to tell your friends at the Maritime Academy, so the view is beautiful and nothing disturbs me, what do you want?
So I think it's very important that the crew knows that they are prioritized. If something happens, they are prioritized as number one.
Okay, crew is priority number one, just so we all remember this. That's a good one.
And also that you have, if something happens, an incident or something, that you have resources available, sure, like helicopter assistance.
Helicopter assistance for immediate assistance,
And also that we have the speed dial number to Sahlgrenska that we had also. That's very good.
Speed dial Sahlgrenska, no? But this...
Yeah, so if something happens, if someone gets injured, then the crew is available, have the opportunity to call and get help.
Good.
And yeah, so.
Eric, if the vessel Stena Impero, she had a red ensign. You got help from the British government.
Yep.
Now, next time you might actually have a Swedish flag. If that would have been a Swedish flag vessel, what help would you have wanted?
Yeah, I mean, there's, well, we would definitely like the escort that we got later on from the UK
You need
Navy.
escort ships.
Yeah,
Yes,
escort
okay,
ships, and I
yes.
mean, that's my question back here. I mean, what are we doing to secure the security in Gulf of Aden or Strait of Hormuz from Swedish side? I mean, we have
This, our friends will respond to you very shortly.
Very good, and I mean we have NATO, and of course I mean we have EU and so on. So of course it's I think we need to show some science down there. I know during the Gulf of Aden time when the threat level was a lot higher down there, we had some presence down there, but it was quite limited.
So from what I remember, it was actually you needed military presence in the sense that you don't want a political declaration saying everything is safe. Because the big issue was not, in my view, Stena Impero, it was the second vessel, Stena Important, that came in 2 days later.
Yeah.
Would you send another 24 of your crew members into harm's way? Why? And we would never do that unless we had rock-hard guarantees from the Royal Navy that they would stop any kind of threat to the vessel. And only after the government had persuaded us that the crew and the vessel, and well, it was an empty vessel, so there was no cargo, was safe, did you decide that you would go into the Sound. So you need hard physical defense, and you need the mental assurance that whether it's an appendicitis or whatever it is, but that there is help to be had, because you are very much alone and all by yourself when you are at sea.
Yeah, absolutely. And
right.
I think, I mean, Björn, you mentioned that we should be aware of we should definitely not let the US take care of the global seas. And well, I guess with you saying that you have a little bit broader picture than I have in this respect. But I think in the Strait of Hormuz and so on, there are other countries that are present. But of course, US is the definitely major factor down there that is dealing with most
Before we
problems.
get to the Gulf of Aden, we're going to get back to the Gulf of Aden, but right now we're going to do Skagerrak and the Baltic Sea. So if I can look at sort of Fredrik and Thomas, sort of if something would happen, port of Gothenburg tomorrow, a bomb would go off, or you got a telephone call saying, I have put one mine outside Hunnebådan or wherever, what would you do?
I hope that no other Swedish police would rise to the right level, so we can start our plans that are prepared. But if the threat is so big, the police will take over the operation, and we will give them all we can to help them. The decision how it's open or not, it depends on the threat. But if you say you have a dirty bomb coming in with cargo, would you allow 20% to go in not searched, or would you say no volumes goes in? So that's the question, and it's a matter of days before the painkillers is out on the pharmacists and.
But is that so, or how much redundancy is it? I mean, if you come with the DFDS vessel, the ship owner says, I don't want to go into this port. Could they go into Varberg, or could we do this via Aarhus or Drammen?
The problem is that it's the infrastructure. It's not only the quays or the cranes or the port facilities. It's also the infrastructure, the railroads, the bridges, the roads, and so on. And the Port of Gothenburg has that capacity. So it's not easy, but we shouldn't forget that we have 2,700 kilometers of coast. Of course, all harbors are important, but you can't bring in the biggest vessels. No. Anyway, so that goes into Gothenburg. So of course it would be a big disruption that would affect Sweden.
But I guess the first action would be to redirect the cargo flows, wouldn't it? I mean, Öresundsbron might work, or sort of.
Well, I think the competence is in this room. How easy it is just to tell DFDS to put the ship to Varberg. I don't think it's so easy. It would be a big disruption, that's for sure.
And then when the helicopter does not arrive, you phone the real cavalry, and that's when you come in, Fredrik.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you protect what's happened, can you protect the vessel sailing in Skagerrak?
I would say it depends. Obviously, yes, it's the basic answer. I would like to respond to a few things here. The flow of logistics needs to go into harbor. Depending on the situation, if that turns even worse, Sweden is dependent on trade. So the risk management needs to be managed by all partners. A sea mine, that would be an alert in the Navy. On mine countermeasures, the closest ones is in Karlskrona, and they would leave harbor immediately. And after that, they would have a mine countermeasure operations in the sea lanes into the Gothenburg harbor. We are currently having problems with mines in the lanes into the harbor. So we had a mine countermeasuring operation in this summer for the mines that were laid somewhere in the Second World War. So the competency actually removing the mines are quite high, but it takes time. So the redundancy in the harbors needs to be there, or at least the awareness where to go. So that needs to be planned, pre-planned. The second question, could we protect a cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz or in Skagerrak? Yes, we can, if it's pre-planned. Having the expeditionary capabilities of leaving Sweden with a surface warfare ship down to the Strait of Hormuz is a fairly long trip if we are stationed here. So obviously that is out of the question because there are other warships in the shipping lanes, unless there is an Operation Atalanta or another operations there. In Skagerrak, it would be so much more easy for us to respond to a threat boarding teams. We are trained with helicopters. We are trained with using our own ships or boats.
Okay, I'll put you on the spot. So the three Russian corvettes that passed, they had Iskander robots or missiles on board?
Caliber,
okay,
yes.
sorry. I had to watch out
No
there.
ballistic missiles on those,
Okay.
no.
Okay, do we have any weapons to protect us from such a weapon right now?
Yes.
Good. Woohoo. Great
Yeah.
answer. Yeah. Okay, so Niklas, now you're going to get your NATO thing. So over and above what sort of Fredrik has and the police has, we now have a NATO membership. Soon. Soon, yes. How does that change the picture, and can we call upon, how much aid and assistance can we call upon?
The main change here is that if you zoom out a bit here, it's if you have ships from NATO nations being threatened, you could envisage that you have embarked Marines in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz, and that could be used. I mean, Stena Impero was an example here of the complications there, where you had the Royal Navy units helping out. But you can see that this could be done in a different context, and the planning for this is what makes it a lot easier. We are not alone in doing this, so we can scale things up. So we are more secure within NATO in this respect also than we were only a year ago, I would say. But we also have to take the long view. I mean, your question here is very much to the point. What if there's a threat in the next few weeks? Well, I think you should think in years or maybe even a decade here. And as I mentioned briefly earlier, the change in the Royal Swedish Navy with its contents and the platforms and the operational concepts that is now being discussed. We are getting a capability to operate in Skagerrak, Kattegat, the North Sea, and the Danish Straits, and perhaps also beyond. But this will take 5 to 10 years before we begin to see that effect. Is it fast enough? Absolutely not. It should have been done long ago, in my humble opinion. But at least we're going in that direction. And it will also be a Navy that is one size up, so it can operate both in the Baltic Sea, helping in to bring other friends and allies into the Baltic Sea, but also on the West Coast. And this is what we haven't had for the past 20 years.
And just so, Cecilia, or to convey to your other political friends who are here, I mean, one reason why ship owners have a red ensign is that you can get physical protection, and we can just reflect upon the fact that Sweden has $60,000 in GDP per capita. We're amongst the richest countries in the world, and currently we don't have one single vessel that can meaningfully protect anything outside Skagerrak, maybe. Or am I wrong there, Fredrik?
No.
No. So we are getting there. The problem I have, I mean, is imagine that there's a US election in 15 months. The security situation in Europe can look completely different in 18 months. And we are talking about the capacity with frigates, or what we are having, 2030, 2035. So I mean, there is a significant discrepancy here. Okay, so just to try to sort of to round it up, we have a multitude of threats. We don't really know what could strike us, but we've had a significant preparedness, both in physical ability, but also in our pre-talk. Thomas, maybe you just want to say something about coordination, because I think that really struck me, that sort of, we're talking to each other in a way that we've never done before. So the limited resources we might have are actually utilized in a better way, in your opinion.
Yeah, and the lead word is cooperation. For example, I would recommend every harbor to have a maritime security committee led by the harbor, because we have the responsibility in peacetime, and you can have all the authorities participating in this maritime security committee. That's one way that is very effective, because then you get to know everyone and you can discuss. You don't have to produce, but the network is very important when you talk about port security.
And you talk to the ship owners, so you keep us informed, because it's sort of, we have staff or colleagues' sort of lives at stake here. So that's very important that in those networks that the ship owners are there as well.
Yeah, of course.
Niklas wants to say.
Just wanted to add also that there is, NATO is not just only about military stuff. NATO Maritime Command has a dedicated group working with civilian shipping as well. And I think as soon as possible, we should have representatives to be part of that, because that gives you the extra level and helps mitigate the threats that we've been talking about.
So I'd like to round off this conversation with roughly where Björn started, that probably the world is slightly more complicated. We have threats, but we've had threats the past 500-600 years. But I take some solace in the fact that global trade will look different, but it's not stopping. And the fact that, Eric, that your vessels, they do 20 knots, and if they don't go to one port, they'll go to another port. It might be slightly more expensive, but as we heard in the morning panel, some extra cost to the end consumer for the energy transition is not a huge thing, where we might have some extra cost to create further redundancies in order to be able to trade. Are you worried about being able to supply Europe with energy in the future? The answer is no.
Yes. No. No, we will manage for sure. We will manage for sure. But of course, there's going to be bottlenecks here and there, and what that means for the industry is,
So thanks for supporting me on that one, in the sense that Sweden has 52 government-financed ports. A year ago, I would be here saying, you know, rationalize, let's just have one port, and it's all going to be Gothenburg, and we're going to be so much more efficient. Today, I say, thank God, we have 52 ports, an enormous amount of redundancy. Look at the port infrastructure in the rest of Europe, and actually the capabilities that we have. I mean, we've been talking about piracy. I spoke to a ship owner yesterday, horribly, had a VLCC taken in Nigeria, $45 million later. That was not the issue. The issue was the crew had been in Nigerian prison for 18 months. So the case that I will make is that the world is changing. I think the most flexible industry in the world, which is shipping, will be able to accommodate, with the good help of Fredrik and Thomas and the analysis from Niklas, because this is what we've done, and fortunately our assets are tradable. However, don't forget, and the correct number is 2 million seafarers that we are actually exposing to work situations that would never have been acceptable on land. And Emma, the last verdict, do you have confidence that these gentlemen here will be able to provide you the security so that you can wholeheartedly recommend to become a seafarer to young girls and boys who are looking at this fantastic industry?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think we have to reach out in the right channels to the youngsters.
The right channels.
Not like, no offense, Sjöfartstidningen and GP, but I think the youngsters don't read those magazines. We need to reach out, and also the port to be more visible, so we know that it exists. Of course, at Donsö, everyone knows that you can work at sea and everything, but I mean, in Gothenburg, my friends don't know what it's all about. They don't know anything about it, so, and I'm from Gothenburg.
Okay, so the challenge is not more than better communication, more visibility, the right channels. Probably a bigger threat than Al-Qaeda and the Hormuz Sound, because we will manage those. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Tack så mycket.
Thank you very much for a very interesting afternoon, and thank you, Carl-Johan, for guiding us through this topic in a very, very, very good way. And there are, please take, you should have books here also.
This is a great book, and I don't know why Lennart Fogelberg, he probably had too many copies in store. It's the Swedish history in 500 years from the Royal Navy's perspective. And the best part of the book is there is a picture of Erik Hornell, very small, but it's... I will... You were at the book release. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And I will take yours. Thank you. And I'll give that to Björn. So there we go.
We have another book here also.
And this is an almost equally cool book. Donsö 2016. Congrats.
That is even better.
Varsågod. Ja, du fick den där. Vad bra.
Thank you very much. All right, this day is soon coming to an end, but we will welcome up on the stage Anders Hermansson. He is the CEO of the Swedish Shipowners Association. Please give him a big hand. And can you hear Anders?
Let's try again.
Yes.
Oh, now
very good. Okay, it has been a long day, but it has been a very interesting day. If we will try to sum up this day, Anders.
That's a really tricky one, but I mean, listening to the minister this morning, and I think here, but also at the start of the Dunse shipping meet, we can see that shipping is on the political agenda in a way it certainly wasn't 3 years ago, or even 2 years ago. I think it's also interesting to see how shipping is now perceived from a political side, where it's not just transportations of goods from A to B, which is, of course, vital to Sweden. We are highly dependent on this. But it's also the emerging realization that shipping is an industry itself. And I think that paves the way for what we heard from the minister today. I'm super happy to see that we are having a review of the Swedish tonnage tax system, which will hopefully make it super competitive. And I would say it should be the aim to make it the best in Europe. I was also very happy to hear about the good news of a bareboat register entering into being worked on. And of course, the mentioning of training. I think this is 3 things that are on top of our minds and things that we've been working with from the industry. So that's really good takeaways, I think, so far.
When I try to sum up the whole day, I think that we are standing in front of a new normal order. There is change coming because of the environment, and there is change coming because of the security order and everything. And I think this is a fantastic day to be in this business. There is so many opportunities that will become that you can do here in the future. You have access to capital. You have access to the government now. You have access to good processes, and you don't have to just compete with low cost. Now is the time to be innovative and see to it that there is so much business opportunities to ahead.
That's super good.
Yeah, you have to be sound, of course, but there is so much opportunities.
And I think if we look at the Swedish shipping industry in the cluster, we are so well positioned for the future. We are way ahead of most of our competition in terms of green. We have that. So now it's just a matter of making use of this technological advantage and turning it into market opportunity. We also are very much well aware of the need to ensure sustainability for our crews on board. And we certainly have very good ship operators and owners that can operate and work in the markets and position themselves very good for the future. And I also think it's interesting to see how this can be developed further, to see, for example, how we heard today, how ship owners, perhaps harbors, fuel suppliers, and perhaps a little bit the government will be able, how can we make this market opportunity and enter into long-term contract? Is there some way forward there where we can collaborate? Is there a way for the government to support the Swedish industry in terms of the need for green transportation, the shipping industry and the fuel suppliers and the ports together? That's something that I would like to see and being discussed further on. But I also think we heard very good panels here today, and there are a few takeaways, at least for me. I think, Carl-Johan, you mentioned the security situation, our ships and our seafarers. I think the industry needs to be a little bit more vocal on this. We have to speak up to the politicians to ensure that they know the situation better than they do today.
I learned a new word today. Zombie fleet.
Yeah.
A fleet full of zombies. Yes.
Yeah, but that's something, and that's a reality that we need to work with.
Yes,
as an
absolutely.
industry.
The dark fleet and the grey fleet and the zombie fleet. We need to address that.
Yeah, but I also think that we are really, the demand is there for a green and resilient shipping industry, and there is certainly opportunity to be found for the Swedish shipping industry at this.
Absolutely. Do you have some finishing thoughts?
I have some more papers, but you told me to keep it short, so now I'm all out of more comments.
The Swedish Shipowners Association with Anders and Camilla had published an article today, so you should absolutely read that. We would like to thank you, everyone, all the speakers, all the participants, and everyone that has been here today. It has been a really, really good day. And now we will end here, and everything will continue at the exhibition area. There will be trains here that can transport you to the exhibition area, or you can decide to take a walk, about 10 or 15 minutes walk. And it's still good weather, and time for networking, and then the dinner that will start at about 6 o'clock. So see you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mikael.